Hey guys, tonight we are going to drift back into Paris of the 1920s, a city glittering with jazz, absinthe, and endless promises of freedom. You step into smoke-filled cafés where artists sketch wild dreams on crumpled napkins, poets whisper verses until dawn, and every corner hums with the energy of a world trying to forget the horrors of war. At first glance, it feels intoxicating, a playground of genius, rebellion, and beauty. But here's the reality check: you probably wouldn't last a week. Behind the laughter and the music lies something far darker. Heroin flowed like coffee, traded as casually as sugar cubes, and entire generations of painters, writers, and dreamers surrendered themselves to its grip. They weren't just chasing inspiration, they were losing themselves, piece by piece, until the very art they created became both currency and coffin. Before we wander deeper into these Parisian nights, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these sleepy journeys into history. And drop your location and local time in the comments. We're building a gentle map of listeners across the world. Now, let's drift together into the heroin cafes of Paris. Seductive, destructive, unforgettable. You arrive in Paris in 1920, and the city greets you with contradictions. By daylight, wide boulevards shimmer under electric lamps, and cafes spill over with chatter. But beneath that glow lies exhaustion, the kind that seeps into bones, the kind that no celebration can truly disguise. The Great War has been over for 2 years, yet its shadow stretches down every alley. Posters still hang in tatters on the walls, calling men to enlist. Families still wear black for sons who will never return. And in the silence between piano notes, you swear you can hear the echo of distant artillery. You sit at a cafe near the Sorbonne, and around you, every patron tells the same story in different disguises. The poet stares into his glass, searching for words that never come. The young woman smokes her cigarette with the defiance of someone who carried a household alone, while her husband rotted in a trench. The old veteran taps his spoon against his saucer in steady rhythm, as if keeping time with phantom guns. They all breathe, but none of them feel whole. And you are one of them, carrying invisible wounds, trying to pretend the world has stitched itself back together. Into this fragile soil comes the foreign flood. Americans loud with money, restless with prohibition, back home wander into Paris as though it were a playground. They throw dollars on cafe tables, demand more absinthe, and brag about the things they cannot get in New York. Their laughter feels jarring against the grief-soaked air, but they are welcomed because Paris is starving for money, for distraction, for any chance to reinvent itself. You watch the two worlds collide, scarred veterans and careless foreigners, grief meeting indulgence. It is combustible, a chemistry experiment waiting to ignite. By day, cafes look harmless. Students argue about Rousseau. Painters sketch sunlight dripping through trees. But as twilight thickens, the city shifts. Lamps' dim curtains are drawn, and the whispers begin. You learn quickly that there is a second Paris, the Paris of midnight, where the language itself becomes code. A sweetened coffee means cocaine. Asking if the painter's palette is ready signals heroin. The city that wore daylight like a respectable mask now bears its secret face. And that secret thrives because everyone needs something. Veterans need silence for their nightmares. Artists need inspiration, or at least the illusion of it. Wealthy foreigners need adventure to justify their escape. Dealers need clients. And Paris itself, this broken, glittering giant, needs the illusion of being alive, even if it is fueled by chemicals. You sit back, sip your bitter coffee, and realize this is not simply recovery after a war. This is a city teaching itself to forget one dose at a time. You walk further into Montparnasse, where the cafés overflow with restless energy. It feels as though Paris is trying to outshout the silence of the graveyards, to drown the memory of mud and blood beneath a tidal wave of music and paint. Every wall is covered with posters advertising new plays. Every basement holds a jazz band blowing until sunrise, and every second person you pass claims to be an artist. You sense that the war did not only scar Paris, it unshackled it. In the narrow alleys behind the boulevards, you see studios lit by candlelight, where canvases lean 3 deep against the walls, their paint still wet. You hear poets shouting verses at each other, like soldiers firing shots determined to prove their vision stronger. Sculptors drag broken stone through courtyards, chiseling it into shapes both grotesque and divine. Writers fill cheap notebooks with lines that veer between brilliance and delirium. And everywhere laughter echoes, a laughter too loud, too desperate, the kind of laughter that hides despair. The cafés themselves act like stages. At La Rotonde, you sip your drink among dreamers who sketch you without asking. At Le Dôme, you hear heated debates that spiral from politics into metaphysics within a single breath. And at La Closerie de Lilas, you see foreign names etched into marble tables. American, Irish, German, proof that this place has become a sanctuary for the dislocated. For you, it feels intoxicating. Where else could you sit at a rickety table and hear a painter argue with a novelist while a violin bleeds through the smoky air? But you notice something else too. Beneath the celebration lurks rebellion. These artists are not only creating, they are defying. They scorn the old academies, mock the politicians who promised a war to end all wars, and ridicule the bourgeois traditions that seem meaningless after so much death. For them, destruction is not only memory, it is a method. To tear down, to shock, to provoke. That is the true art of the New Age. And into this rebellion slips something far more dangerous. You realize that heroin fits perfectly into this ethos. It is radical taboo, a substance that shatters boundaries, just as cubism shatters perspective. For a generation that believes pain is proof of authenticity, heroin offers both suffering and inspiration wrapped in one vial. It is not marketed as poison, it is sold as a muse. You see it passed hand to hand, not with shame, but with reverence, like a holy relic. On one night, you overhear a painter confess, "I cannot paint clean anymore. Sobriety feels like betrayal." Others nod, and you know they believe it. The café applauds the artist, who stumbles in with hollow cheeks, but a fresh canvas, because in this twisted world, decay looks like devotion. And you, sitting quietly at your corner table, understand that Paris has made addiction into an art form. Walking home through the chill of dawn, you notice how the cobblestones glisten with rain. Newspapers pile on doorsteps, carrying headlines about politics you barely register. The ordinary world goes on steady and indifferent. But for you and the others who wander, The nightlife has narrowed to two poles: creation and oblivion, with heroin promised as the bridge between them. And the terrifying part is you feel the pull yourself. You begin to notice a new current weaving through the cafes, a louder accent, a sharper laugh, the unmistakable swagger of Americans who have fled across the ocean. They arrive in Paris dressed in tailored suits and flapper dresses, their voices echoing through quiet streets like brass horns out of tune with the orchestra. Back home, prohibition has closed the bars and driven drinking underground. But here in Paris, the wine flows freely, and so do far stronger temptations. You sit near one of these newcomers at Le Dôme one evening, watching him order a bottle of champagne with the ease of someone who has never worried about money. He raises his glass and boasts about New York, about the speakeasies and the cops he bribed, about how the old country is so much freer. The locals smile, partly amused, partly resentful. To them, this man represents privilege. To you, he represents hunger, the hunger of a restless generation that cannot bear the stillness of sobriety. Soon you realize the Americans do not only drink, they buy. They buy art with pockets full of dollars canvases still dripping with paint. They buy stories to tell back home tales of bohemian nights with poets and dancers. And they buy drugs, sometimes cautiously, sometimes boldly, because Paris has what America cannot offer. Heroin, traded as easily as coffee beans, is the forbidden fruit they cannot resist. The cafe owners understand this quickly. For every painting sold to an American heiress, for every poem scrawled in a foreign notebook, a dose of heroin changes hands. Sometimes the transaction is hidden in the price of a sketch. Sometimes it is openly wrapped in velvet paper. The Americans treat it as a novelty, an exotic souvenir from a city of decadence. But for the Parisians already hooked, it is survival. And so, without meaning to, the foreigners pour fuel onto a fire already burning. You feel the atmosphere change with their arrival. The nights grow louder, the stakes higher. Where once the cafe had been a sanctuary of grief-tinged creation, now it buzzes with money and demand. Dealers multiply. Patrons who once whispered now negotiate openly, confident that the presence of wealthy foreigners shields them from police interference. And in this strange protection, heroin seeps deeper into the veins of the city. One evening, you follow a group of Americans spilling into the street laughing as they stumble toward Montmartre. Their pockets jingle with coins, their eyes shine with intoxication, and their careless joy masks the fact that they have no idea what they are feeding. Behind them, the Parisians watch, not with admiration, but with calculation. To many, these visitors are both benefactors and destroyers, patrons who keep the system alive even as they corrupt it further. And you, walking among them, feel torn. Part of you resents their arrogance, their ability to treat addiction as an adventure. But another part envies their freedom, their money, their distance from Verdun's ghosts. They will leave Paris with stories and souvenirs. You will stay bound to the cafes, caught in a cycle that does not let go. Their escape is temporary. Yours is a life sentence. The truth settles over you slowly, like smoke creeping under a closed door. The heroin craze of Paris is not born only from trauma. It is amplified by wealth, by foreign desire, by the reckless appetite of those who can afford to turn ruin into recreation. And once they have tasted it, Once they carry their stories back across the ocean, Paris itself becomes mythologized. The city of art, jazz, and heroin, the place where destruction masquerades as freedom. You find yourself standing before Café de l'Amour, a place that does not look remarkable from the outside. The sign creaks in the evening wind. The windows are fogged, and the doorway smells faintly of spilled wine. Yet once you step inside, the atmosphere closes around you like velvet curtains. The air is thick with smoke and perfume. The chatter low, but charge the piano in the corner, playing notes that sound both seductive and mournful. You realize quickly this cafe is not like the others. At the center of it all is Madame Noire. She moves through the room with quiet authority, her dress black as midnight, her smile sharp as glass. She does not shout, she does not bargain, she simply observes, and when her gaze falls on you, you feel both chosen and exposed. To most, she offers nothing more than absinthe and a place to sit. But for those she deems ready, she offers something else, something far more dangerous. You watch her approach Jean Baptiste Maro, a young painter who carries the war in his bones. His hand trembles on the table, his eyes shadowed with memories of Verdun. Madame Noire sets down a small vial before him, no bigger than a finger, filled with liquid light. For the pain, she murmurs. And with that, Jean Baptiste's life tilts off its axis. The transformation is almost immediate. Within minutes, his shaking slows, his face eases, and he laughs a sound foreign to him since the trenches. He picks up his charcoal and begins to draw. This time the lines do not collapse into chaos. They form shapes, bodies, visions. The other patrons lean closer, mesmerized. His art seems touched by fire, raw and alive, and they whisper among themselves, perhaps this is the true secret of Café de l'Amour. Soon, Jean Baptiste is no longer just a patron. He is an attraction. People gather to watch him work, to barter for his canvases, to share in the glow that heroin seems to kindle in him. A painting for a week's supply, a sketch for a night of silence from his ghosts. Madame Noire never pressures him. She does not need to. Her genius lies in patience, in letting the artist believe the choice is his. But you can see what Jean Baptiste cannot. Every masterpiece he creates is another thread binding him tighter to her, and it is not only him. Around the cafe you see others caught in the same snare. A sculptor named Elise Dubois carves frenzied shapes, her marble figures, fractured yet haunting. A chemist from America, Bobby Chen, slips small packets into waiting hands, the supposed paint powders that are nothing but refined heroin. A banker, Henri Lacoste, tall and smug, counts notes in the corner, ensuring the cafe's empire thrives behind the mask of art. Together, they form an unholy orchestra. The artist, the supplier, the financier, and the queen who conducts them all. The cafe itself seems alive. The tables are sticky with spilled drink. The velvet couches sag under the weight of bodies half asleep, and the air buzzes with a strange mix of ecstasy and despair. Music drifts from the gramophone, warbling slightly as the record slows, but no one notices. Their attention is fixed on the needle, the powder, the fleeting rush of inspiration that blots out the world for just a few hours. For Jean Baptiste, the spiral feels like ascent. Each new dose births another painting, Each painting earns him more admiration. Critics whisper that he is changing art itself, dragging beauty out of the mud of Verdun. He begins to believe he is chosen, touched by genius, and you, sitting close enough to see the hollows deepen in his cheeks, know the truth. He is not rising, he is burning. Café de l'Amour becomes a mirror of Paris itself, glittering, broken alive with promise, yet rotting underneath. To outsiders, it looks like freedom, like art reborn. But for you, and for Jean Baptiste, it is a velvet trap. Every night spent here is another step deeper into a labyrinth where the walls are painted with masterpieces, but the exit is nowhere to be found. By the mid-1920s, you begin to see Paris itself as more than a city. It feels like a laboratory, an experiment with no rules, where human pain and human brilliance are the ingredients. Each cafe becomes a chamber in this vast machine, each artist a subject, each dose of heroin another variable in a study no one admits is being conducted, and you, caught in its rhythm, feel both participant and prisoner. Walk down the boulevard du Montparnasse at dusk, and it seems every doorway hums with hidden traffic. Cafe windows glow dimly, silhouettes shifting inside. Painters haul canvases, still wet with color, trading them like coin. Poets scrawl furious lines, rip them from their notebooks and pass them across tables in exchange for packets wrapped in brown paper. A laugh here, a groan there, all woven into the background hum of a city feeding on itself. You notice how the language of Paris shifts. Words that once belonged to art now belong to addiction. Inspiration means dosage. Silence means oblivion. Even masterpiece becomes code, not for brilliance, but for the number of nights one canvas can buy. To newcomers, it sounds like poetry. To you, it is survival slang, the dialect of dependence. The Americans are still here, pockets full of dollars, eager to buy not only the paintings, but the stories that come with them. They return home with tales of nights spent with haunted geniuses, of cafes where truth itself seemed liquefied. And in telling those stories, they mythologize Paris as something larger than life, a place where suffering is fashionable, where ruin is proof of depth. Their dollars keep the system alive, but their admiration cements the lie that this is freedom, that this is creation. You know better. You've watched Jean Baptiste's hands tremble as the dose wears off. His eyes glaze as he waits for relief. You've heard Elise's marble shatter when her chisel slips her body too weak to hold steady. You've seen Madame Noir's smile as she accepts another canvas, another poem, another soul. And still the system thrives because Paris itself wants it to thrive. The authorities look the other way. Perhaps they are paid. Perhaps they are afraid of scandal. Perhaps they believe the myth themselves that this chaos is simply art taking a new form. But you see the pattern clearly. What was once individual indulgence has become industrialized dependency. The cafes no longer simply serve artists. They manufacture them, break them, and sell their remains. On one sleepless dawn, you wander to the Seine. The water glitters deceptively calm, carrying reflections of bridges and spires. Around you, the city stirs awake. Bakers set out their bread. Children tug at mothers' skirts. Tram bells echo down cobbled streets. Ordinary life continues, neat and steady. But you feel apart from it, as though you inhabit a parallel Paris, a nocturnal one, stitched together by smoke syringes and desperate laughter. The two cities share the same stones, the same air, but not the same heartbeat. And then it strikes you, this divide is the essence of the experiment. Paris is testing how far it can stretch the line between brilliance and destruction, how many souls it can burn in pursuit of beauty. The cafés are the laboratories, heroin the catalyst, and artists the willing subjects. Every masterpiece birthed in these rooms is a data point in a grim equation. How much genius can you harvest before the body collapses? You do not know the answer. You only know that you are caught inside it, unable to step away. Because leaving would mean silence, sobriety, the risk of confronting pain without escape. And Paris, seductive and merciless, whispers that you must stay, that here, and only here, can you be both broken and whole. You first notice Jean Baptiste Maro on a rain-slick evening when the lamps along the boulevard du Montparnasse flicker against the wet cobblestones. You are already weary, your body heavy with sleepless nights, when you step into Café de l'Amour and see him at the far corner. His presence is unmistakable. A young man with sunken eyes, his fingers blackened with charcoal, his back curved like a soldier still carrying his pack. He looks both fragile and indestructible, as if Verdun carved him from stone, but hollowed him out from within. He does not speak at first. He only draws hunched over the table, sketching figures that blur between memory and vision. You watch him shade the outline of a soldier's helmet until it morphs into the halo of a saint, the kind of transformation that could only be born of trauma. And you realize he is not merely drawing, he is exorcising. Each stroke of charcoal is a scream turned into shape, a nightmare translated into form. When he finally looks up, his gaze catches yours. There is recognition in his eyes, the kind that passes silently between survivors. You know what it means to wake in the night with ghosts clawing at your chest. He knows too. No words are needed. The café itself speaks for you. The clink of glasses, the rustle of coats, the low hum of desperation that binds you both to this place. And then Madame Noire arrives. She moves through the haze like a shadow given flesh, her dress flowing like liquid ink. She does not need to command attention. It comes to her naturally. Her hand rests lightly on Jean Baptiste's shoulder, and she sets a small vial on his table. For the pain, she whispers the same words she once spoke to you. He hesitates, but only for a heartbeat. Then he accepts. The change is immediate. His trembling stops. His shoulders loosen. For the first time all evening, he breathes without effort. His lips part in a half-laugh, half-sigh. And when he takes up the charcoal again, the figures on the page leap into life, sharper, stranger, luminous with energy. Patrons gather around him, whispering that they are witnessing something divine. You know what it is. It is not divinity. It is heroin. From that night on, Jean Baptiste becomes part of the café's pulse. His sketches turn to canvases. His canvases turn to currency. One painting for 10 doses, another for a month's supply. He tells himself and others that he has found a muse, and they believe him because the art glows with the intensity of a man possessed. But you, watching closely, know the truth. Each masterpiece is a bargain, another piece of his soul traded away. Still, you cannot look away. You find yourself drawn to him, to the way he straddles brilliance and ruin. Perhaps because you see your own reflection in his collapse. Perhaps because Paris itself insists this is what art requires. Not discipline, not patience, but sacrifice. And so you sit beside him, night after night, as the cafe tightens its grip around you both. You begin to notice how quickly Jean Baptiste shifts from survivor to spectacle. Only weeks ago, he was another hollow-eyed veteran, hunched over a table. Now, each night you step into Café de l'Amour, you see a small crowd gathered around him. Patrons lean over his shoulder as he paints, their whispers rippling through the smoke. They trade stories about his past, Verdun, the nightmares, the miraculous transformation, and they speak of him as if he were already legend. At first, Jean Baptiste seems embarrassed by the attention. His cheeks flush when strangers compliment his work. His hand hovers uncertainly over the canvas, but heroin softens his doubts. With every injection, the tremor in his fingers vanishes. His brushstrokes grow bolder. His eyes gleam with a feverish light. The drug convinces him that he is not only healed, but chosen. And soon he believes it. Madame Noire knows exactly how to use this belief. She never praises him directly, never flatters him outright. Instead, she provides what he craves more deeply than compliments supplies. A canvas when he asks a vial, when he falters, a smile that tells him his devotion is justified. She does not need to declare him her star. She allows the cafe to crown him night after night until his place is unquestionable. For you, watching from the shadows, it feels surreal. The cafe once belonged to many voices, sculptors muttering over their marble poets, shouting drunken verses, musicians scratching melodies on broken strings. Now, it orbits around Jean Baptiste. His art adorns the walls. His laughter fills the silence. His collapse is everyone's entertainment. The cafe feeds on him, and in return it gives him the illusion of immortality. His paintings reflect the duality of his life. Some blaze with color, almost violent in their intensity, bodies twisted, skies aflame, saints and soldiers locked together in impossible embraces. Others are ghostly, pale sketches that seem to evaporate as you look at them. Critics call this variety genius. You know it is simply the rhythm of addiction, the manic rush of creation, the hollow slump that follows. Yet no one dares to say it aloud. To question his art would be to question the cafe itself. You sit beside him one evening as he describes a new vision. He speaks of angels descending onto battlefields of light, pouring into wounds of death turned into beauty. His voice trembles with conviction, his eyes unfocused, as though he squeezed the vision hovering just beyond the smoke. He insists heroin has unlocked truths too profound for sobriety, and the people listening nod eagerly, desperate to believe that their own indulgence might be equally justified. But you see the cracks. You notice the way his lips dry, the way his body sags between doses, the way his laughter has a hollow edge. You realize that what the cafe worships is not his art but his suffering. They adore him because he embodies the myth they all want to believe, that ruin can be transfigured into brilliance, that destruction is simply another word for creation. And so, Jean Baptiste becomes more than an artist. He becomes a symbol of the city's hunger for beauty at any cost, a beacon that draws more patrons into Madame Noire's grasp. His fame spreads beyond Café de l'Amour, into other cafes, into galleries, into salons, where his name is whispered with awe. Yet you cannot shake the truth you've seen in his weary eyes. He is not ascending, he is burning. The weeks blur into months, and Jean Baptiste becomes the heartbeat of Café de l'Amour. Each evening when you arrive, you find him already surrounded by admirers, canvases lean against the smoke-stained walls, their colors still wet, their subjects half divine and half grotesque. Some depict the trenches of Verdun, transfigured into dreamscapes, soldiers rising like saints, explosions rendered as halos of light. Others show distorted portraits of patrons, their faces stretched into masks of ecstasy and despair. Every brushstroke pulses with urgency, as if he fears the world will vanish if he stops creating for even a moment. At first, the café celebrates him. Patrons barter furiously for his work, slipping coins, promises, or packets of heroin across the table. To them, each painting is more than decoration. It is proof that the myth of Paris lives on proof that trauma can blossom into beauty. Collectors whisper that Jean Baptiste is redefining art, dragging it out of the mud of the past and into something raw, unfiltered, true. You know better. You see the cost written in the hollows of his cheeks, the tremors returning when the high wears thin. The cycle becomes predictable. He injects, and the fever takes him. For hours he works with superhuman energy, the café holding its breath, as though watching a miracle unfold. Then comes the crash. His body slumps, his eyes cloud, his words tangle. He collapses into a chair, while others fuss over him, praising him even in his weakness. Madame Noire ensures the next vial is always waiting, and so the rhythm continues. Rise, collapse, rise again. Inspiration is no longer a gift. It is a commodity manufactured on demand. You try to speak with him during one of his lucid moments. He smiles faintly, his fingers stained with paint, his voice raw. The war didn't end, he tells you. It just moved inside us. Heroin lets me control it. Without it, the noise returns. He insists he is not addicted, but enlightened, that the drug does not enslave him, but frees him. His words carry conviction, but you see the desperation flicker in his eyes, the silent plea for someone to believe him. Around him, the café thrives. Elise Dubois's sculptures grow more fragmented, her marble figures resembling shattered bodies pulled from ruins. Bobby Chen experiments with new chemical refinements, boasting of purer doses that burn cleaner and last longer. Henri Lacoste counts profits in the corner, his ledgers disguised as art inventories. Together, they turn the café into more than a gathering. It becomes an industry. The art produced here fuels the addiction, and the addiction fuels the art. The system feeds on itself endlessly. One night, you watch Jean Baptiste unveil a massive canvas. The room falls silent as he pulls away the cloth. The painting is a battlefield, but instead of corpses, luminous figures ascend into the sky, their faces serene, their wounds glowing like stigmata. The patrons gasp, some weeping openly. To them, it is revelation, a vision of redemption. To you, it is a plea, a desperate attempt to turn his nightmares into something holy. And yet, even as the applause echoes, Jean Baptiste stumbles, clutching the table for support. The muse that fuels him is also devouring him. You walk home under the dim street lamps, his image seared into your mind. You realize that Jean Baptiste is not simply one man. He is the embodiment of the entire city's bargain art for oblivion, beauty for destruction. And like Paris itself, he does not know when the experiment will end, or if anything will be left once the fire burns out. The longer you spend at Café de l'Amour, the clearer it becomes that Jean Baptiste is not simply an artist rising by chance. He is the centerpiece of a carefully woven web. Around him, gathers a constellation of figures, each with their own role to play, each orbiting under the subtle gravity of Madame Noire. Elise Dubois is one of the first you notice. A sculptor of unusual intensity, she arrives each evening with hands already dusted in marble powder. Her work has grown stranger since she fell into Madame Noire's circle torsos, without arms, faces without eyes, bodies fractured, as if caught mid-explosion. Patrons admire her daring, calling her the prophetess of fragmentation. But you see the truth. Her sculptures mirror her own disintegration. She trades her statues for doses, her studio for the café, her independence for dependence. And through it all, Madame Noire smiles, ensuring Elise believes she is free even as she is bound tighter each night. Then there is Bobby Chen, the American chemist. He claims he came to Paris to escape the sterile laboratories of the States, to chase freedom in the Bohemian Quarter. But freedom quickly turned into enterprise. He refines the heroin flowing through the café, boasting of cleaner highs, smoother experiences. He speaks of chemistry with the zeal of an artist, insisting his powders are themselves a kind of creation. And the café believes him, for who would dare deny the man who makes their visions possible? Henri Lacoste, the banker, completes the triangle, tall, composed with a smile too polished to be sincere. He manages the money. He disguises transactions as art sales, laundering profits through galleries and private accounts. When critics marvel at the sudden boom of avant-garde art, they do not realize they are marveling at Henri's ledgers. He is the quiet architect, behind the illusion, the one who ensures that heroin is not only consumed, but commodified. And presiding over all of it is Madame Noire. She rarely raises her voice, rarely makes a direct demand. Instead, she orchestrates with subtle gestures the tilt of her head, the arch of her brow, the placement of a vial on a table. She allows the café to crown its own idols, then feeds them just enough to keep them burning. To Jean Baptiste, she is both savior and captor. He thanks her with each painting, unaware that his gratitude is another chain around his wrist. You begin to understand that Café de l'Amour is no ordinary café. It is an ecosystem. Artists provide the spectacle. Chemists provide the fuel, bankers provide the disguise, and Madame Noire ensures it all runs smoothly under a cloak of elegance. Each patron thinks they are there for their own reasons, escape, inspiration, rebellion. But together, they form a machine, and the machine's product is not art, but addiction. One night, as you sit watching Jean Baptiste work feverishly on a canvas, you feel the weight of the trap closing in. He paints as though his soul is pouring directly onto the linen, his eyes wild, his lips murmuring words only he can hear. Around him, the others cheer, barter, consume. And above it all, Madame Noire stands, with her faint smile, her hands folded neatly, as if she were a conductor, pleased with her orchestra. You realize then that she does not simply run a café. She commands a theater of ruin, where every performance is another act in a play with only one ending. And yet you remain, because to leave would mean silent sobriety, the unbearable weight of facing the world as it is. So you stay caught in the glow of Jean Baptiste's brilliance, even as you know it is brilliance born of chains. Night after night, you watch Jean Baptiste ascend and unravel in equal measure. By now his fame has spread beyond Café de l'Amour. Galleries whisper his name, collectors boast of owning his canvases, and critics declare him the future of French art. To walk the left bank is to hear fragments of his legend, repeated in every corner, the verdant survivor who turned nightmares into beauty, the haunted genius who painted as if his veins carried fire instead of blood. But you seated at his side, see the cost behind the myth. You see the hours he spends, slumped over the table, head in his hands, waiting for Madame Noir's next vial. You see the paint streaked across his skin, where his trembling fingers failed to find the canvas. You see the hollow under his eyes deepen, until even the applause cannot fill it. To the world, he is soaring. To you, he is breaking. The cafe applauds him anyway. Patrons treat his collapse as performance, his weakness as authenticity. When he stumbles, they call it devotion. When he raves about visions, they call it prophecy. Each fragment of his decline is polished into legend, consumed hungrily by those desperate to believe that suffering is the true path to greatness. And Jean Baptiste, trapped in their gaze, feels he cannot stop. To stop would be to betray the myth, to admit he is only a man. One evening, he unveils his largest work yet, a canvas taller than a man stretched against the cafe wall. When he pulls away the covering, the room falls silent. It is a battlefield, transfigured. Soldiers rise into angels, explosions bloom into flowers of light, corpses glow with serenity. It is both grotesque and divine, a vision so powerful that even you feel your chest tighten. The cafe erupts in applause, some patrons weeping openly. Jean Baptiste smiles, faintly swaying under the weight of their worship. But when you glance at him closely, you see his hand shaking, his breath shallow, his lips cracked. The genius they celebrate is killing him, and no one dares to intervene. Not Elise, lost in her own collapse. Not Bobby Chen, who only sees formulas. Not Henri Lacoste, whose eyes count profit more easily than tears. And certainly not Madame Noir, who stands in the shadows, satisfied that her orchestra plays in perfect ruin. You want to reach for him, to shake him, to tell him that the applause is hollow, that the art is brilliant, but the price is too high. But the words lodge in your throat, drowned by the tide of admiration that surges around him. To speak against it would be to betray not only him, but the entire city that feeds on his destruction. And so you remain silent, complicit, one more witness applauding as a man burns alive. On your way home that night, the city feels different. The Seine glitters, but it looks like a river of mercury, cold and poisonous. The bridges arch like ribs over a body that is already dying. You realize that Paris itself is Jean Baptiste, writ large, dazzling on the surface, rotting beneath. The city that claims to worship art is in truth worshipping ruin, and Jean Baptiste, caught between veneration and annihilation, becomes its perfect symbol. He is both saint and sacrifice, genius and casualty. His triumph is his destruction, and as long as the cafes roar with applause, as long as the heroin flows like holy water, his fate is sealed. You walk away, knowing that you will remember him forever, not as the savior of art, not as the prophet the critics describe, but as the man who embodied Paris itself in this cursed decade, brilliant, broken, and burning. You first hear her name, whispered long before you see her. Margaret Worthington. The syllables roll through the smoky air of the cafes. with a mix of awe and suspicion, like the name of a patron saint who may also be a devil. To some, she is a benefactor and heiress who pours her fortune into starving artists. To others, she is a parasite feeding on their genius while hiding her own motives. Either way, she is a presence you cannot ignore. When you finally see her, she does not fit the image you expected. She is tall, elegant, her Boston accent softened but not erased by years in Paris. Pearls hang loosely from her neck, her dress cut in the latest fashion, yet her eyes betray something sharper. She moves through Café de l'Amour with the grace of someone who knows she is being watched and does not mind. Every turn of her head, every gesture of her hand seems designed to feed the myth surrounding her. She arrives with a retinue of admirers, young writers, desperate painters, musicians who trail behind her like moths to a flame. She listens to their pleas, buys their canvases, quotes lines of their poetry back to them as if she remembers every word, and then quietly she introduces them to something more. A packet slipped across the table, a nod toward Bobby Chen, a smile in Madame Noir's direction. It becomes clear Margaret is not simply a patron, she is a bridge. Her fortune shields her. While others risk scandal, she moves untouchable, her money insulating her from consequence. The police nod politely when they see her name. The bankers bend rules to accommodate her transfers, and so she becomes indispensable to the cafe network. She buys the art funds. The circulation connects the foreign clientele with local suppliers. Her hands never look dirty, but they are everywhere. To you, she is both fascinating and terrifying. Fascinating because she seems to embody the glamour of the jazz age, wealthy, confident, a woman living free of the restrictions that once chained her sex. Terrifying because you realize how much of the cafe's machinery depends on her. Without Margaret, Jean Baptiste might still be trading paintings for powder. With her, the scale expands. Her patronage is gasoline poured onto fire. You sit across from her once, and she smiles at you with practiced warmth. Art must be nurtured, she says, her pearls catching the light. And sometimes nurturing requires unconventional methods. Her voice is calm, almost maternal, yet the implication chills you. She does not see herself as enabling ruin. She sees herself as cultivating brilliance. And in Paris, where suffering has been rebranded as authenticity, her logic finds fertile ground. As she leaves that night, the crowd parts for her, their eyes filled with gratitude or envy. You watch her step into a waiting car, its headlights slicing through the fog, and you understand Margaret Worthington is not just another patron in Paris. She is a node in a network far larger than you imagined. And under her touch, what began as a cafe's secret is becoming a city-wide enterprise. It does not take long for you to realize that Margaret Worthington is no ordinary benefactor. At first, she buys art with the enthusiasm of a collector, her apartment filling with canvases, from Jean Baptiste sketches, from Elise Dubois, even notebooks of half-finished poetry. But the sheer volume of her purchases makes you suspicious. She cannot possibly hang them all, cannot possibly value every piece. And then you notice what others begin to whisper. Many of those works never resurface. They vanish into storage, or perhaps into silence. Their purpose served the moment money exchanged hands. You watch her pattern unfold. A painter finishes a canvas in a fevered rush, his eyes glassy, his hands shaking, Margaret arrives, compliments his vision, and pays generously. Within the same evening, he finds a new vial waiting for him, courtesy of Madame Noir. The connection is seamless. Art transformed into money, money into heroin, heroin into more art. The cycle tightens, and Margaret is the pivot around which it spins. Her network grows quietly. Wealthy Americans visiting Paris seek her out not just for introductions to artists, but for access to experiences their own cities cannot provide. She entertains them in salons, where jazz musicians play until dawn, where champagne flows without end, and where behind velvet curtains, packets of heroin are slipped into waiting hands. They return home with canvases, stories, and addictions that will never quite leave them, and Margaret, smiling with effortless charm, remains untouchable. One evening, you follow her to a gallery opening. The room sparkles with chandeliers and crystal glasses, but the art on the walls feels secondary to the conversations in hushed corners. You overhear an aristocrat from Vienna arranging shipments of rare pigments, a coded phrase you now recognize. You see a British socialite laughing too loudly, her eyes too bright, after Margaret discreetly presses something into her palm. The gallery is less an exhibition than a marketplace, and Margaret is its master of ceremonies. You realize that her power comes not only from money, but from perception. To the world, she is a patron, a modern woman of refined taste, bringing American wealth to nurture European genius. That image protects her, shields her from suspicion. Even when rumors swirl, they dissipate in the face of her charm and her social standing. Police who might raid a dingy cafe would never dare interrupt a salon hosted by Margaret Worthington. But beneath the glitter, you see the danger. Margaret does not simply support the system, she scales it. Her fortune ensures that heroin is no longer confined to smoky back rooms, but flows through galleries, salons, even diplomatic circles. What began as a bohemian indulgence is transforming into a structured network, one that binds artists, aristocrats, and foreign visitors together in mutual dependence. You sit across from her at Café de l'Amour one night, and she speaks candidly, her voice low enough for only you to hear. "They think I buy art," she says, stirring her drink lazily. "But what I really buy is loyalty." And loyalty, she adds with a knowing smile, is worth far more than any painting. The words settle in your chest like ice. For the first time, you grasp the scope of her ambition. She is not content to be a patron. She is an architect, designing a system where every brushstroke, every note of music, every dose of heroin feeds her growing influence. And as the night stretches on, as you watch artists fall deeper into the spiral, she sustains you. Understand the truth. Margaret Worthington has become more than a presence in the Parisian cafes. She is their backbone, their lifeline, the elegant thread stitching ruin into permanence. The change begins subtly, almost invisibly. At first, Café de l'Amour seems like the center of it all, a singular stage where artists bleed brilliance onto canvases and patrons barter with doses. But soon, you notice that the pattern repeats elsewhere. A cafe across the boulevard adopts the same whispered codes, the same shadowy clientele. Another gallery hosts evenings where the art matters less than the packages passed between velvet curtains. The network is no longer confined, and it is multiplying. Margaret Worthington is at the heart of this expansion. Her introductions carry weight. A word from her opens doors to salons in the Marais, to discreet dinners in the 7th arrondissement, to embassies where champagne flows and secrets are traded as freely as powder. You follow her once to a gathering hosted in a banker's mansion where the chandeliers glisten, but the true commerce happens in the quiet drawing rooms. Aristocrats their titles weighed down by debt trade heirlooms for vials. Diplomats their loyalty wavering, accept gifts that blur the line between patronage and bribery, and all of it flows back toward the cafés, back toward Madame Noir's empire. The language of the city shifts with the spread, where once only artists whispered of sweetened coffee or the painter's palette. Now you hear the same phrases slip from the lips of barons and duchesses. Sobriety becomes a mark of dullness, a lack of sophistication. To abstain is to admit you do not belong. The myth grows stronger. Heroin as muse, heroin as marker of authenticity, heroin as the passport into Paris's most glittering circles. Jean Baptiste remains a star, but now he is joined by others. Elise Dubois' fractured sculptures find their way into galleries, praised as visionary. A poet once dismissed as incoherent is suddenly hailed as profound, his verses written in the haze of heroin. Even Bobby Chen the chemist is treated as an artist of sorts, admired for the purity of his refinements. The boundaries blur until you no longer know who is creator and who is supplier, who is patron and who is captive. All are entangled in the same web. You sense the cafés changing too. Where once they were havens for misfits, now they are arenas of competition. Rival proprietors mimic Madame Noir's methods, offering not only drinks, but access not only conversation, but chemicals. Some fail quickly, their patrons overdosing, or their supply chains collapsing. Others thrive building reputations as fiercely as any gallery. Paris becomes a patchwork of clandestine laboratories, each feeding the city's insatiable appetite for art and oblivion. Margaret moves among them, all her pearls glinting, her voice calm, her presence unquestioned. She plays patrons against each other, balancing power with the deafness of a conductor. To some, she offers financial rescue. To others, protection from scrutiny. To all, she offers the illusion of freedom. And they believe her because they want to. One evening, as you sit in a café near Montmartre, you overhear a conversation between two young aristocrats. They laugh as they describe Jean Baptiste's latest work, comparing it to religious revelation. Then, with casual ease, they discuss shipments of heroin disguised as pigment crates, their tone as light as if they were planning a picnic. You realize that what once lived in shadows now breathes openly, shielded by wealth and status. The system has metastasized, and Paris itself has become complicit. Walking home that night, the city feels different. The laughter drifting from windows is no longer purely joy. It carries an edge of hunger, of dependency. The street lamps glow like watchful eyes, and every doorway seems to conceal another transaction. You understand that Paris has crossed a threshold. What began as a secret within Café de l'Amour has spread across the city like wildfire, fueled by money ambition and Margaret Worthington's quiet hand. As the months pass, you begin to notice how untouchable Margaret Worthington has become. While others in the network whisper nervously about police raids or scandal, she moves through Paris with an aura of invincibility. The secret is not just her fortune, it is the shield of power that surrounds her. Margaret cultivates connections the way a gardener tends roses, pruning carefully, feeding selectively, arranging them into a display of elegance. Ambassadors know her by name. Ministers bow their heads slightly when she enters a room. Aristocrats, who would once have sneered at an American heiress, now hang on her every word. She hosts dinners where the seating arrangements feel like chess moves every guest placed to maximize influence. At her table, generals sit beside poets, bankers beside artists, diplomats beside dealers, and over the clink of crystal, the lines blur until no one can quite say where legitimacy ends and corruption begins. You attend one such gathering in a grand salon near the Champs-Élysées. The chandeliers blaze with light, the air scented with roses and cigar smoke. Conversations ripple like currents, and you drift among them, catching fragments that chill you. A German attaché complains about post-war reparations, his voice thick with resentment, while discreetly accepting a packet of powdered pigment. A French deputy jokes about morality in politics, his laughter covering the sound of coins sliding across the table. And at the center, Margaret smiles serenely, her pearls glistening, as if she were conducting not only the evening, but the entire city. It is not only Parisian officials who protect her. Foreign dignitaries, too, find comfort in her salons. For them, heroin is not just a vice. It is a bond, a shared secret that cements alliances. In her drawing rooms, treaties are whispered as easily as confessions. You realize with a shudder that her network is no longer about art or even addiction. It is about leverage. Every vial exchanged is a thread tying someone to her, binding them in loyalty or blackmail. The police, when they do investigate, find themselves paralyzed. How can they raid a salon where half the guests carry diplomatic immunity? How can they arrest a woman whose guest list includes senators, princes, and bankers? Even if they dare it, the scandal would ripple far beyond Paris, shaking international relationships at a fragile moment in history. So they look away file reports that gather dust and wait for orders that never come. To the artists, this shield feels like salvation. They believe Margaret's presence keeps them safe, that her influence guarantees their freedom to create without consequence. They praise her as a patron saint, a guardian of the avant-garde. But you see, the darker truth, her protection, is not for them, but for herself. She does not prevent their ruin. She ensures it can continue without interruption, feeding the machine that she now controls. One night, as you stand near the Seine, after leaving her salon, you feel the weight of it pressing on you. The lights shimmer on the water, and behind you, laughter spills from windows where power and ruin entwine. You realize that Paris is no longer merely indulging in heroin. It is being reshaped by it. Politics, diplomacy, finance, and art are now strands of the same web. And at the center sits Margaret Worthington, her smile as calm as ever, her hands as clean as polished pearls, and you, a silent witness to it all, feel both awe and dread. For if even power itself is complicit, then who is left to resist? By the late 1920s, you begin to realize that Margaret Worthington's reach no longer ends at the boulevards of Paris. The cafés that once felt like secret enclaves are now mere nodes in a vast constellation, and Margaret is the hidden star connecting them all. What began as whispered exchanges in dim rooms has become a network that stretches beyond France, across borders, oceans, and continents. Letters arrive for her in envelopes stamped with foreign crests. Ships dock in Le Havre, carrying crates labeled as art supplies, though you know better. Diplomats depart Paris with suitcases heavier than when they arrived, their smiles betraying nothing. Wealthy tourists return to Boston, New York, and London with more than paintings and poems they carry with them, the powder that Paris has sold as muse, and the hunger that will not leave them once they return home. Margaret's genius lies in how she cloaks it all in legitimacy. She funds galleries in Berlin, donates to theaters in Vienna, sponsors exhibitions in New York. To the public, she is an international patron, a woman of vision, nurturing art across the world. But you, having watched her closely, know that each generous act doubles as a cover. Behind every gallery is a warehouse. Behind every exhibition, a shipment. Behind every performance, an introduction that binds yet another soul to her web. Jean Baptiste's paintings begin appearing abroad, sold in salons, where critics marvel at his tortured brilliance. They hang in London townhouses, in Manhattan lofts, in Vienna palaces. But you know that for each canvas displayed, others vanish quietly, their value not measured in francs, but in doses. His fame grows, but so does his dependence. He is exported alongside his art, not as a man, but as a myth. Paris's tragic genius, crafted and consumed by the system Margaret has perfected. The cafés themselves change under this expansion. They become less about creation and more about commerce. Patrons arrive not to discuss philosophy, but to negotiate shipments. Artists are measured not by their talent, but by how well they can produce under pressure. A new word slips into the whisper's supply. It is no longer about inspiration. It is about logistics. And Paris, once the city of light, has become the beating heart of an empire of shadows. You overhear a conversation one night between Henri Lacoste and a visiting banker from London. They speak casually of routes of prices of currencies to be used. To them, heroin is not scandal or sin, it is business. You shiver at the realization that addiction, once framed as art's companion, is now a commodity traded with the same detachment as coal or steel. And Margaret, ever serene, ensures the trade continues smoothly, her influence reaching further than any government dares to acknowledge. Standing once again by the Seine, you let the city wash over you, the laughter spilling from cafés, the jazz drifting from windows, the silhouettes crossing bridges. They are all part of the same illusion. Paris still sparkles, still enchants, still beckons the world, but beneath the glitter lies a machinery of dependency, refined and exported, with Margaret Worthington as its quiet engineer. You realize then that the heroin craze is no longer a Parisian tragedy. It is a global one, and the artists, the poets, the dreamers, who once believed they were free, have become the face of an industry that thrives on their ruin. Margaret has succeeded in turning destruction into influence art, into currency, and Paris into the capital of a world-spanning addiction. And you, standing at the edge of the river, know the world will never look at art or at Paris the same way again. At first you thought Café de l'Amour was unique, its atmosphere, its secrets, its power, but soon you begin to notice the pattern repeating all over Paris. Walk down a different boulevard, and another door creaks open into a room that feels hauntingly familiar. The same haze of smoke, the same piano stumbling through jazz notes, the same quiet code running beneath the surface of conversation. The city has learned the formula, and other cafés are eager to imitate it. One night, you find yourself at Le Serpent Rouge, a café tucked between a bookstore and a bakery in Montmartre. By day, it looks harmless students, huddled over books, young couples whispering about love. But after midnight, the shutters close, the lamps dim, and the room transforms. A sculptor in the corner offers doses alongside his sketches. A violinist plays while slipping small packets into outstretched hands. The owner, a former cabaret singer, with a laugh too loud to be innocent, oversees it all with an indulgent smile. You recognize the rhythm immediately, another theater of dependency modeled on Café de l'Amour's blueprint. Soon, there is La Sirène Noire, in Pigalle La Chambre Obscure, near the Luxembourg Gardens, Le Minotaur in Belleville, each with its own flavor, its own specialty, its own clientele. Some draw students eager to prove their rebellion. Others attract aristocrats chasing novelty. Still others function almost openly as distribution centers where the art on the walls is less important than the packages exchanged under them. The city becomes a constellation of such places, each pulsing in sync, feeding into the same bloodstream. You realize that Paris itself has turned into a map of addiction. Walk 10 minutes in any direction, and you can find a cafe that speaks the code, that knows the trade. The language becomes universal, sweetened, coffee extra pigment, the painter's supplies. Even strangers can enter, and with the right phrase, gain access to the hidden economy. It is as though the city has invented a parallel dialect, one spoken only after midnight, one that thrives on secrecy and complicity. For artists, this expansion feels liberating. No longer must they rely on a single place, a single patron. They can wander from cafe to cafe, trading their creations for the relief they crave. But for you watching from within, it feels suffocating. The choice is an illusion. No matter which cafe you enter, you find the same machinery, waiting the same trap, disguised as sanctuary. And always in the background, you sense Madame Noir's influence. Even in places she does not own, her methods echo. Even in rooms she never enters, her codes are spoken. The empire she and Margaret built has spilled beyond its walls, absorbed into the city's bloodstream. What was once a single cafe's secret is now Paris's open truth. Walking home through the night, you realize that the city itself has become a network. Each cafe is a node, each whisper a connection, each transaction another pulse. And you, like everyone else, are caught inside it, unable to escape, because escape would mean silence, sobriety, and the unbearable return of reality. The deeper you sink into the world of the Parisian cafes, the more you realize that the city has invented an entirely new language. It is a dialect not taught in schools, not written in books, but spoken in whispers across candlelit tables. Without it, you are an outsider. With it, you are part of the current that flows beneath the city's glittering surface. At first, the words sound innocent. A patron asks for sweetened coffee, and a waiter nods, slipping away with a knowing glance. Another mentions the painter's palette, and suddenly, a packet appears beneath the table. A sculptor complains of needing more clay, and within minutes he vanishes into the back room with Bobby Chen. To the uninitiated, these are harmless phrases, the chatter of artists. But to you, once you've learned their meaning, every sentence feels like a secret door opening. The vocabulary expands endlessly. Extra pigment means heroin. A long brush is a syringe. The silent muse refers to an opium pipe. Even entire conversations are coded layers of metaphor, stacked upon metaphor, so that outsiders hear nothing unusual, while insiders understand every word. You sit at a table one night, listening as two men discuss the colors of twilight. To anyone else, it is poetic nonsense. To you, it is a negotiation price, purity delivery. What astonishes you is not only the precision of this language, but its creativity. Artists, after all, are its architects. They weave addiction into metaphor-cloaked transactions in beauty. To order heroin in Paris is to compose a kind of poetry, one that feels as much performance as request, and the performance itself becomes part of the allure. Patrons lean closer, voices drop lower, phrases become riddles. The cafe turns into a stage where every line is both art and code. This hidden language does more than protect the network. It binds it. Speak the code, and you belong. Fail to understand it, and you are marked as outsider, perhaps even a threat. You feel it yourself the first time you use a phrase correctly. The nod you receive feels like initiation, like crossing into a brotherhood. It is not just about the heroine. It is about identity. In this city, to know the words is to be alive. Of course, the police hear rumors of the code. They catch fragments in their surveillance. But without context, the phrases dissolve into noise. They raid cafes and find nothing but artists discussing colors, poets reciting verses, musicians debating tones. The system works because it uses the very tools of art, metaphor, ambiguity, beauty to shield its ugliness. Paris hides its sickness behind poetry, and the world applauds its brilliance. One night, Jean Baptiste leans toward you, his eyes glowing fever bright. He whispers, "Do you know the phrase for death?" You shake your head, and he smiles sadly. They call it the final sketch. His voice lingers in your ear as the cafe hums around you, and you understand that even mortality has been woven into this language. Addiction has become art, and art has become addiction, until the two are indistinguishable. Walking home, you mutter the phrases under your breath, feeling them coat your tongue like ash. You realize that Paris itself now speaks in code, its very heartbeat a riddle, and you, like everyone else, cannot help but play along. You begin to notice that money is not the only currency in these cafes. In fact, francs often feel secondary. The true economy, the one that keeps the midnight world alive, runs on art itself. Canvases, poems, sketches, songs. These are the coins passed across tables, the tokens traded for vials, the offerings laid at the altar of dependency. Jean Baptiste embodies this barter perfectly. Each time his supply runs low, he produces another painting, as though heroin itself were the patron commissioning his work. One night, you watch him exchange a canvas, an apocalyptic vision of angels rising from shattered trenches, for a packet wrapped in brown paper. No francs change hands. The painting vanishes into Margaret Worthington's collection, and Jean Baptiste walks away with trembling relief in his pocket. Elise Dubois, too, has adapted to this economy. Her studio is filled with half-finished busts, torsos carved with desperate speed. She drags one into the cafe, its marble face cracked but haunting, and hands it to Henri Lacoste. He appraises it briefly, not as art, but as collateral, before nodding to Bobby Chen, who produces her payment. She leaves lighter, her body shaking with anticipation. The bust remains abandoned until some admirer claims it not as sculpture, but as evidence of her descent. Even poets participate. You sit beside a young man who scribbles verses onto scraps of paper, his handwriting uneven, his ink smudged. He pushes them across the table, murmuring that they are fresh lines. In return, a small vial slides into his hand. The poems are never published, never recited. They serve only as barter, the fleeting residue of inspiration exchanged for oblivion. What strikes you most is how natural this system feels. Patrons speak of it casually, as if this were simply the way art has always been traded. A painting for 3 nights, someone says. A song for 2 doses. The measurements become units of time, not of value. How long the high will last. How many hours of silence it will purchase. Art is no longer created for galleries or audiences. It is created for sustenance, for survival, and yet the deception persists. Critics marvel at the flood of new works pouring from Montparnasse. They call it a renaissance, a rebirth of genius after the war. They see only the canvases, not the vials that summon them. They do not ask why so many masterpieces emerge overnight, why the brilliance burns so bright and so brief. You want to scream the truth, that these works are not miracles, but transactions, that every stroke of paint is weighed against grams of powder. But you stay silent, as everyone does, because the illusion is too seductive. One evening, you overhear Margaret speaking to a group of foreign visitors. She gestures gracefully to the walls, where Jean Baptiste's and Elise's works hang side by side. Paris has become the forge of the future, she declares. The visitors nod, dazzled. They do not see the half-empty glasses, the pale faces, the shaking hands of the artists in the shadows. They see only the art, and they are willing to pay any price for it. Margaret smiles, because she knows the price has already been paid. As you leave that night, the weight of it presses on you. The cafés are not merely sanctuaries, they are factories, and the product is not only heroin, but art itself churned out under its influence, exchanged for survival, consumed as spectacle. You realize with a chill that Paris has turned creation into currency, and that in this economy, the artist always pays the highest cost. You had always imagined heroin arriving in Paris, like contraband treasure smuggled in crates, whispered about in ports, passed hand to hand, like forbidden jewels. But one night, you discover a deeper truth. Much of it is made right here, in the belly of the city, hidden beneath the very cafés where artists sing its praises. Bobby Chen is the architect of this hidden world. By day, he drifts through Café de l'Amour with the smile of a charming expatriate, always ready with a clever joke or a flask of bootleg whiskey. By night, he descends into the cellar where tables are crowded with jars, beakers, and powders. You follow him once slipping down the narrow stairwell, and the sight strikes you harder than any painting upstairs. It is a laboratory, humming with the cold precision of science, yet cloaked in the same smoke and desperation as the café above. The smell hits you, first sharp chemical sour enough to sting your eyes. Bobby moves through it casually, adjusting burners, stirring mixtures, humming as though he were mixing colors on a palette. And perhaps that is how he sees it. Chemistry is just another kind of art, he tells you with a wink. Instead of brushes, I use flasks. Instead of paint, I use powder. But the result is the same transformation. His hands move deftly, as if sculpting something unseen. The artists upstairs worship him. They call him the silent muse, the man who turns their visions possible. When Jean Baptiste unveils a new masterpiece, Bobby accepts the applause as though it were partly his. And in truth, it is. Without his refinements, without his steady supply, the fever of creation would collapse. He does not only feed the system, he sustains it. But you see the danger in his pride. He experiments constantly, chasing purer highs, longer effects, subtler blends. Some nights, the results make patrons weep with ecstasy. Other nights, they collapse before their canvas, their bodies racked by convulsions. Bobby shrugs off the failures with the detachment of a scientist. Not every brushstroke is a masterpiece, he says, but you feel the chill of his words. In this laboratory, human lives are test subjects, and addiction itself is the experiment. The cafés depend on these underground labs. You learn that Le Serpent Rouge hides one beneath its kitchen, where the clatter of pans covers the hiss of burners. La Sirène Noire conceals another behind a false wall sacks of flour stacked to disguise crates of morphine. Paris has become a city not only of art studios, but of laboratories, each one crafting the powders that fuel the night. And just as painters compete to outdo one another, so too do the chemists. Purity becomes prestige, dosage becomes signature. They speak of their formulas, the way artists speak of style, each proud of the mark they leave on the canvas of ruin. You stand one evening in Bobby's lab as he pours a finished batch into small glass vials. The liquid glows faintly in the lamplight, shimmering like molten gold. He lines them up neatly, proud of his work, then hands one to you with a grin. This, he says, is the future of art. You stare at the vial, at the reflection of your own weary face in its surface, and you feel the weight of his words. Perhaps he is right. Perhaps this is the future, but it is also the end. When you climb back upstairs, the cafe greets you with music and laughter, as if nothing dark lies beneath its floorboards. Patrons sip their drinks, argue about philosophy, barter for paintings. None of them suspect, or perhaps none of them care, that the inspiration flowing through their veins was born in the same cellar where you stood. And you realize then that Paris itself is not only consuming heroin, it is producing it, nurturing it, elevating it into an art form. And the line between muse and poison has never been thinner. By now you no longer see the cafés of Paris as separate rooms scattered across the city. You see them as organs inside a single body, each beating in rhythm, each sustaining the life of something larger and darker than itself. Paris has become a living organism, and heroin is its blood. Le Serpent Rouge is the heart-pumping doses through the veins of Montmartre. La Sirène Noire is the lungs inhaling jazz and exhaling smoke thick with dependency. La Chambre Obscure is the stomach consuming poetry and paintings only to spit them back out as commodities. And at the center, Café de l'Amour acts as the brain, directing the flow with the quiet authority of Madame Noire and the elegant hand of Margaret Worthington. You walk these streets and feel as though you are wandering through the anatomy of addiction. Each corner, another artery, each alley, another nerve. The system operates with terrifying efficiency. Artists stagger into one cafe, trade their work for powder, and leave to collapse in another where their paintings are praised as revelation. Dealers shuttle between rooms carrying not only drugs, but gossip stories and rumors that keep the myth alive. Patrons drift endlessly, their loyalty not to a single place, but to the organism itself. It no longer matters where you go. Once inside the network, every cafe is the same cafe, and yet the illusion of individuality persists. Each establishment cultivates its own mythology. Le Minotaur boasts of being the most radical, its walls splashed with surrealist nightmares. La Sirène Noire claims purity, its chemists bragging of formulas no rival can match. La Chambre Obscure lures intellectuals, cloaking transactions in philosophical debate. These differences are cosmetic. Beneath the surface, the blood is the same, the rhythm the same, the dependency the same. You begin to think of Paris as a patient one whose illness is spreading faster than any doctor can treat. The cafés are the symptoms: flushed cheeks, fevered dreams, sudden bursts of manic energy. From the outside, they look like signs of life, vitality, rebirth after the devastation of war. But you living within them know they are signs of disease. The city is not healing. It is decaying beautifully. One evening, as you drift between cafes, you feel the organism around you more vividly than ever. The streets pulse with footsteps. The doors breathe smoke. The windows blink with lamplight. Every sound, laughter, music, argument, echoes like a heartbeat, and you moving through it are not separate. You are a cell inside this body, carrying its sickness, sustaining its life, unable to escape without dying yourself. The realization terrifies you, yet also seduces you. There is something strangely comforting about belonging to such a vast organism, about surrendering individuality to the rhythm of the city. To resist feels impossible. To leave feels like exile, and so like everyone else you remain. You barter art for survival. You speak in codes, you descend into basements where chemistry masquerades as creation. You do not live in Paris anymore. You live inside it, and it lives inside you. And as dawn breaks over the Seine, the city glows golden, deceiving the world into believing it is reborn. But you know the truth. Paris is not reborn. It is transformed into a body whose pulse is heroin, whose breath is smoke, whose voice is the laughter of those too far gone to care. By the mid-1900s, you begin to sense that Paris is no longer simply a city with cafes that dabble in heroin. It has become something larger, something more dangerous, a landscape where the craze spreads like a fire smoldering under floorboards. You feel it in the way conversations shift in ordinary restaurants, in the way whispers follow you down the boulevards, in the way strangers exchange glances that speak volumes without a word. Once heroin was confined to a few cafes, the hidden salons of Madame Noire, the smoke-choked corners of Montparnasse. Now, it bleeds outward, saturating neighborhoods that once seemed immune. Pigalle, once famous for cabarets, now hosts clubs where dancers twirl under chandeliers while dealers slip packets into waiting hands. Belleville, once alive with working-class grit, now hides cellars where chemists refine powders that spread across the entire city. Even the left-bank universities, once devoted to study, now harbor students who test heroin as if it were another philosophy to be debated. You wander into La Sirène Noire one evening and realize how far the contagion has reached. The room is louder, more reckless than Café de l'Amour ever was. Patrons laugh too hard, stumble too easily, their joy burning too hot to last. On the walls hang canvases that seem like parodies of Jean Baptiste's work: wild colors, distorted faces, chaos for the sake of chaos. The critics call it daring. To you, it looks like desperation painted in oil. The competition among cafes intensifies. Owners vie for patrons, not only with music and atmosphere, but with promises of stronger, purer, more exotic highs. Rumors spread of mixtures laced with absinthe, of powders blended with opium, of doses that transport the user beyond ordinary ecstasy. The artists chase these rumors as if chasing muses, believing each new formula will unlock a deeper vision. But you, watching them collapse on couches, see the truth. They are chasing the edge of oblivion, and some will not return. Violence begins to flicker at the edges of this expansion. A cafe burns in Montmartre under suspicious circumstances, its charred walls reeking of gasoline. A poet disappears after boasting too loudly of his supplier. Whispers circulate of rival proprietors sabotaging each other, of debts unpaid, of bodies found in the Seine. Paris dresses itself in brilliance by day, but by night it grows more ruthless, its veins pulsing not only with heroin, but with blood. And yet the allure does not fade. If anything, it intensifies. Writers proclaim that Paris has entered its most creative age blind to the rot beneath the surface. Aristocrats boast of their nights in cafes, where genius and destruction mingle freely. Foreigners flock to witness what they call the new Renaissance. You know the truth. It is not a renaissance, but an epidemic one that consumes everything it touches. Walking home through the fog one night, you pause on a bridge and look down at the Seine. Its waters gleam in the lamplight, carrying reflections of both beauty and decay. The air smells of coal smoke and damp stone, but underneath you sense something sharper chemical, as if the whole river carries the city's sickness in liquid form. From the quay, you hear laughter too shrill to be innocent spilling from the mouth of yet another cafe. In the windows of the Latin Quarter, silhouettes bend over books by day, but by night those same figures bend over needles. Even in working-class Belleville, men with rough hands stained by factory grease now cradle vials like talismans. And among the wealthy, the drug becomes a perverse fashion, a mark of sophistication worn proudly in salons. It strikes you then that Paris is running a fever. The cafes are not separate blazes, but sparks joining into a single firestorm. Every arrondissement becomes infected. Every alleyway hums with the same rhythm of exchange. The city burns quietly, beautifully, a body that refuses to admit its sickness, even as the temperature rises, and you, one more cell within it, can only watch as the fever spreads. You notice that the craze has begun to take on a new shape. It is no longer only about the cafes of Montparnasse, or the hidden rooms where artists barter paint for powder. Now, the obsession with heroin seeps upward into the salons of the wealthy, into the mansions of aristocrats, into the drawing rooms where chandeliers blaze, and polished silver glints in the light. Addiction has become fashionable, and the higher classes, who once sneered at the bohemian excesses of the left bank, now imitate them with breathless enthusiasm. One evening, you attend a gathering hosted by a countess in the Marais. The walls are draped with silk, the air perfumed with roses, and a quartet plays softly in the corner. At first glance, it feels like any other aristocratic soiree. But then you notice the subtle signals, the sideways glances, the discreet packets exchanged beneath lace fans, the champagne glasses abandoned half full, while guests slip into back rooms for something stronger. You realize with a shock that the language of the cafés has entered even here. The same code words, the same whispered bargains, now dressed in velvet and pearls. Writers celebrate this blending of worlds. They proclaim that art has finally broken down the barriers of class, that the muses are no longer reserved for the poor and desperate. To them, the sight of an aristocrat and a starving poet sharing the same vial is proof that Paris is living through a new egalitarian era. But you see through the illusion. This is not equality. This is contagion. The rich are not lowering themselves to join the poor. They are elevating ruin to the status of luxury. Margaret Worthington glides through these gatherings, effortlessly, her pearls catching the light as she speaks of patronage and genius. She frames the expansion as cultural philanthropy, insisting that heroin is merely one tool among many for unlocking brilliance. Her words soothe the guilty, giving the aristocrats permission to indulge while believing they are supporting art. And they believe her because belief is easier than admitting they are complicit in destruction. You begin to notice how critics too fall under the spell. Articles appear praising the fearless experimentation of the new art, the raw authenticity of works produced in the haze of heroin. Reviewers describe paintings as born of the fever of Paris, unaware or unwilling to admit that the fever is literal. Galleries swell with visitors, eager to glimpse genius, to stand in front of canvases that still smell faintly of chemicals, to whisper that they too have touched the edge of inspiration. In these salons, heroin is not whispered about as a vice, but praised as a muse. A duchess calls it her silent confidant. A banker describes it as the ink of modern genius. Even politicians, careful with their words, hint that perhaps such indulgence is the price of progress. Each statement normalizes the madness further, until what was once scandalous becomes chic. What shocks you even more is how the wealthy mimic the very image of the bohemian they once scorned. Aristocrats loosen their ties and affect ragged scarves. Duchesses trade pearls for beads, strung like gypsy charms, and young counts stumble through amateur sketches, insisting they too have found inspiration beyond sobriety. They play at rebellion, but always with safety nets of money and status. Their ruin is never complete, only staged. And yet, they wear it proudly convinced they are part of the same fever that consumes the artists of Montparnasse. You walk home from one such evening with a chill in your bones. The city sparkles around you, but the brilliance feels counterfeit, like a mask hiding a corpse. The laughter of aristocrats echoes in your ears, mingling with the cries of artists too far gone to stand. And you realize that Paris is no longer simply tolerating the heroin craze. It is celebrating it, weaving it into its culture, dressing it in jewels, and calling it rebirth. You begin to sense that the cafes are no longer merely sanctuaries of art and escape. They have become battlefields, each one vying for dominance, each proprietor hungry to claim the title of Paris's true temple of inspiration. The atmosphere shifts. What once felt like camaraderie now bristles with rivalry, and beneath the smoke and laughter, you detect the scent of something sharper: competition, resentment, and the faint iron tang of violence. At Le Serpent Rouge, you overhear patrons boasting that their heroin is purer than anything served at Café de l'Amour. They describe it with the pride of winemakers, comparing texture and clarity as if the drug were a vintage Bordeaux. At La Sirène Noire, The owner lures clients with promises of visionary blends, powders whispered to contain exotic infusions smuggled from Istanbul. The cafes become laboratories of branding, each trying to outshine the others, not with art, but with intoxication. Artists are caught in the crossfire. Jean Baptiste is pulled in multiple directions, courted by rival cafes who want his presence as proof of their superiority. Elise Dubois, once loyal to Madame Noire, is rumored to have sculpted a bust for La Chambre Obscure in exchange for a new formula. You watch them fracture their loyalties, splintering their art, reduced to tokens in a city-wide competition. To the patrons, it feels thrilling. To you, it feels like watching gladiators fight for survival in an arena where the prize is self-destruction. And then, the whispers of violence grow louder. One night, a cafe in Montmartre is found gutted by fire, its walls charred, its ceiling collapsed. Officially, the cause is an accident, a candle left unattended perhaps. But everyone in the cafes knows better. Rumor has it that rivals paid a gang to torch the place to eliminate competition. Another evening you hear that a poet has vanished after mocking a proprietor too loudly. His friends mutter that he was taken care of, his verses silenced forever. The Seine, once a river of romance, now carries secrets, its dark waters hiding bodies weighted with stones. Madame Noire plays the game shrewdly. She does not descend into open conflict, but neither does she remain passive. Rivals who rise too quickly find themselves exposed to police raids. Supplies meant for their cafes mysteriously vanish in transit. Patrons are subtly warned that certain places are unsafe. It is warfare fought in shadows, and Madame Noire, with her calm smile and flawless gowns, is as ruthless as any gangster. You feel the tension in every room you enter. Conversations pause when strangers walk in. Doors are bolted earlier, windows shuttered tighter. Musicians play louder as if to drown out the fear beneath the surface. And yet the patrons keep coming, drawn by the very danger that now permeates the air. Violence becomes part of the allure. To drink in these cafes is not just to chase inspiration, it is to flirt with death, to prove you are brave enough to dance on the edge. One evening, as you sit in La Sirène Noire, you hear a sudden commotion outside. Shouts, the crack of glass, breaking the thud of fists on flesh. The patrons freeze, then laugh nervously, pretending it is nothing. But when you step outside, you see two men sprawled on the cobblestones, blood seeping into the gutter, their faces pale under the moonlight. No one dares speak of it. By the next morning, the bodies are gone, the street washed clean, the city pretending nothing happened. But you know, everyone knows, Paris, once the city of light, has become the city of embers, each cafe a spark threatening to ignite the whole. And you realize with a chill that the heroin craze is no longer only about art or escape. It is about power, territory, and survival. The cafes are no longer safe havens. They are battlegrounds, and every night you enter one, you gamble with more than your soul. You begin to see the fever spreading beyond the glittering salons and shadowy cafes, seeping into the everyday lives of those who once stood outside the bohemian current. The artists were the first wave, but now the tide pulls in clerks, students, school teachers, even grocers. Paris is no longer a city where heroin belongs to a few hidden enclaves. It has become a place where almost anyone might be caught in its undertow. In the Quartier Latin, you watch students gather in cramped apartments, their textbooks shoved aside as they experiment with powders purchased in back alleys. They claim it sharpens their debates, fuels their essays, opens doors to philosophies their professors cannot imagine. But you see, their eyes glaze, their words trail off into incoherent murmurs. What began as rebellion against the stale order of academia turns quickly into dependency, their brilliance fading into silence. Among the middle class, the allure is different. Shopkeepers and clerks, burdened by endless days of routine taste, heroin as escape, they gather in modest cafés after work, their laughter too loud, their movements too loose. For them, the drug is not about art or genius, but about forgetting the rent unpaid, the hours wasted, the disappointments unspoken. Paris offers them a dream, and they take it even as the dream devours their savings, their families, their futures. The cafes adapt to this new clientele. No longer content with poets and painters, they welcome workers and office men with the same sly generosity. Everyone deserves a muse, the waiters whisper, sliding packets across scratched tabletops. And soon, the line between bohemian and bourgeois dissolves. Heroin becomes the common denominator, the glue binding together people who would otherwise never share a table. You witness the consequences in the streets. A young teacher stumbles out of La Chambre Obscure, his satchel spilling lesson plans onto the cobblestones. A typist from the Ministry of Finance collapses at a bus stop, her fingers still stained with ink. Neighbors who once prided themselves on sobriety now carry themselves with the same weary glamour as artists' hollow cheeks, trembling hands, eyes that gleam with fever. Paris wears addiction as if it were the latest fashion, and no one dares call it what it is, collapse. The artists, too, feel the change. For them, the spread is double-edged. On one hand, they revel in the validation proof that their habits have not isolated them, but instead inspired the whole city. On the other, they feel their uniqueness dissolve. What was once a mark of genius becomes a cliché, their visions drowned in a chorus of lesser imitations. Jean Baptiste mutters bitterly one night, "Even the clerks are prophets now." His words carry both scorn and despair. Margaret Worthington sees opportunity. She arranges exhibitions where middle-class buyers can purchase sketches, sculptures, and poems alongside discreet packets. Art for the people, she calls it, but you know better. It is not democratization, it is distribution. She transforms everyday Parisians into both patrons and clients, their wages fueling the same machinery that once belonged only to the avant-garde. Walking through Belleville one afternoon, you hear children singing a skipping rhyme that includes one of the cafe's code words. They do not know what it means, only that it sounds daring grown up, and you realize with a chill that the fever has reached even them, carried like smoke through windows and doorways, seeping into lullabies. By nightfall, you cannot tell who is artist, who is aristocrat, who is clerk. The distinctions blur, the fever unites them all, and Paris, once proud of its diversity, now beats to a single rhythm, the rhythm of dependency. By the close of the decade, you no longer see Paris as a city of cafes, galleries, and salons. You see it as an organism stricken by a sickness that no one dares name. The heroin craze has woven itself into every level of society, from the poorest garrets to the grandest boulevards, from the painter bent over his easel to the minister leaning across a velvet sofa. What began as whispers in smoky corners has become a murmur that fills the whole city, a heartbeat thudding in time with every injection. You walk through Montparnasse at dusk and see the symptoms everywhere. The laughter spilling from calves is too loud, too brittle, collapsing into silence as quickly as it erupts. Posters for exhibitions boast of visions beyond reason, but the canvases inside look less like masterpieces and more like fever dreams. On the bridges over the Seine, couples cling to each other with frantic energy, their eyes glowing with highs that will not last the night. Even the street lamps seem to flicker in rhythm with the city's restless pulse. The police still patrol, but their presence feels theatrical, almost comical. They arrest small dealers on street corners, seize packets from unlucky students, and parade their victories in the newspapers. But everyone knows the truth. The true machinery lies untouched. The salons go on glittering. The cafés go on humming. The shipments continue arriving in crates marked as art supplies. And Margaret Worthington, serene as ever, glides through it all, with pearls glinting at her throat, the conductor of a symphony that no one can stop. You sense despair beneath the glamour. Artists who once believed heroin opened doors now realize those doors lead only deeper into labyrinths. Patrons who once sought rebellion now find themselves bound by chains stronger than convention ever was. Families whisper about missing sons, about daughters who come home trembling and vanish again into the night. Yet the city refuses to confront it openly. Instead, it disguises the sickness as style, the collapse as culture. The newspapers publish stories of brilliance, painters hailed as visionaries, writers praised for their raw honesty, musicians celebrated for their daring improvisations. But you, having walked the streets, know the price behind every headline. You know the paintings were traded for vials, the writings scribbled in fever, the music played by trembling hands. Paris sells the world an image of rebirth while hiding the rot beneath its skin. One evening, standing on the steps of Sacré-Cœur, you gaze down at the city spread beneath you. The rooftops shimmer in the last light of day. The streets hum with voices. The Seine glimmers like a ribbon of silver. To an outsider, Paris is beautiful, eternal, triumphant. But you, with the knowledge of what lies within, see a patient with a fevered glow radiant but dying, and you realize that the heroin craze is not a side note in the city's history. It is its heartbeat, shaping its art, its politics, its very soul. The realization chills you. Paris has become both muse and victim creator and casualty, and you wonder how long a city can burn this brightly before it burns itself away. You first hear his name whispered in the cafés with unease, as though the sound alone might summon him. Bertrand, Inspector Bertrand of the Paris police. Unlike the bumbling constables who parade petty arrests in newspapers, Bertrand carries a reputation for persistence, a hound who never releases once he catches the scent. His presence in the narrative feels like the first chill of autumn, sharp and undeniable. You see him for the first time one damp evening in Montparnasse. He is not flamboyant, not theatrical, no polished cane, no waxed mustache. He wears a plain coat, his hair cropped short, his boots scuffed from long hours on the street. His eyes, though, are striking clear gray and unyielding. They scan a café not like a patron seeking pleasure, but like a surgeon studying an open wound. When those eyes fall on you, you feel exposed, as if every secret you've carried in the smoky rooms has been laid bare. Bertrand does not storm into cafes demanding answers. He lingers. He sits quietly with a notebook, sipping black coffee, listening more than speaking. He watches Jean Baptiste sketch. Feverishly, listens to Elise Dubois mutter about marble and madness, notes the way packets change hands behind folded menus. He says little, but the weight of his silence unsettles everyone. Madame Noir pretends not to notice him, her smile fixed, but you see her fingers drum the table restless. Word spreads that Bertrand has connections in every arrondissement. Concierges whisper to him. Bartenders slip him notes. Neighbors tell him who stumbles home at dawn and who never returns. He pieces together a mosaic of the city's sickness, shard by shard. The cafes dismiss him as a nuisance, but you sense their fear growing. They lower their voices, tighten their codes, shutter doors earlier. The organism that once expanded freely now tenses, aware that someone has begun probing its weak points. One night, you follow him at a distance. He lingers outside Café de l'Amour, leaning against a lamppost collar, raised against the rain. He smokes a cigarette down to the filter, his eyes never leaving the door. When Jean Baptiste stumbles out, half carried by two admirers, Bertrand makes no move to intervene. He only writes something in his notebook, closes it softly, and melts back into the fog. The restraint is chilling. He does not need to act now. He is collecting, waiting patient as the city dams itself. Others feel his shadow too. You overhear a barman whisper that Bertrand asked about deliveries of pigment. A concierge confides that he recognized Bertrand's shoes in his stairwell late at night, listening for comings and goings. Even Madame Noir lowers her voice when his name is mentioned. The cafe scents the hunter, and though they laugh and drink and trade, they glance at the door more often, waiting for him to appear. For you, Bertrand is both terrifying and oddly reassuring. Terrifying because his gaze makes you feel complicit. You too have sat in the cafe, spoken. The code applauded the art born of ruin. If he looks too closely, he might find your name in the margins of his notes. And yet reassuring, because he represents something the city has almost forgotten: resistance. Where others glamorize or profit, he observes with cold clarity. He does not romanticize the fever. He recognizes it for what it is, a plague. One night, you pass him on the street outside Café de l'Amour. He tips his hat slightly, not as greeting, but as acknowledgement. His eyes hold yours just long enough to make you shiver. And in that moment, you realize that the heroin craze, for all its power, has finally met an adversary who will not be dazzled by art, seduced by salons, or silenced by pearls. Inspector Bertrand has entered the story, and Paris will never be the same. The first cracks in the cafe's armor appear not through raids or confiscations, but through whispers, small voices from the margins who have seen too much. Inspector Bertrand knows how to find them. He does not question artists directly, nor confront the cafe owners who would laugh in his face. Instead, he listens to the invisible people, the ones who sweep the floors, guard the doors, or serve the drinks. They notice everything, yet until now no one has cared to ask. One of his earliest confidants is Madame Paty, an elderly concierge who tends to an apartment block near Montparnasse. You encounter her one gray morning shawl, wrapped tight, her eyes darting nervously as she speaks with Bertrand in the courtyard. They come at all hours, she mutters, glancing at the stairwell. Painters, poets, foreigners, always with packages, always with eyes too bright. She lowers her voice. Sometimes they leave, sometimes they don't. Bertrand nods, jotting notes without judgment. For her, it is a confession. For him, it is another thread in the tapestry he is weaving. That night, she lies awake listening for footsteps, each creak of the stairwell, a reminder of the shadows she has chosen to reveal. Then there is Wilhelm Richter, a German musician who plays violin in the café for coins and drinks. His accent makes him easy to overlook his shabby coat, marking him as just another lost soul. But when Bertrand sits beside him after a performance, Richter leans close and whispers, "I see the trades," he says. They give paintings, poems, sculptures, in return always the same, small packets, brown paper. And the banker, the tall one, he counts everything. His hands tremble as he grips the violin's neck knuckles, pale as though speaking the truth might shatter him more than silence ever did. Bertrand collects these testimonies with the patience of a spider weaving a web. Each voice adds detail. The chemist Bobby Chen's scene carrying crates at dawn, the sculptor Elise Dubois delivering busts that vanish into Margaret Worthington's salons, the whispers of shipments arriving at Le Havre, disguised as pigments. None of it is proof yet, but together it begins to form a pattern. And Bertrand is relentless in following patterns. He writes with slow precision each note, like a thread each page, like the score of a dark symphony that only he can hear. You watch as fear begins to ripple through the cafés. Patrons glance more often at the door, their laughter thinner, their whispers tighter. Jean Baptiste paints with manic urgency, as though racing against a storm he cannot name. Madame Noire grows colder, her smile sharper, her eyes darting when Bertrand enters. She knows the net is tightening, though she will never admit it. For you, the shift is unsettling. Once the cafés felt untouchable, shielded by wealth, glamour, and denial. Now, the illusion frays. The waiters speak less freely. The code words slip awkwardly. The transactions carry a tremor of risk. The organism of Paris still beats, but its rhythm falters, disturbed by the quiet persistence of one man and the courage of a few overlooked witnesses. One night, you pass Bertrand as he walks away from La Sirène Noire. His coat is damp, his notebook tucked under his arm. You catch a glimpse of the page names, places, times. He has begun to map the network, to turn whispers into evidence. And you realize with a shiver that the heroin craze, for all its glamour, has left fingerprints everywhere on receipts, on ledgers, on the trembling testimonies of those who have nothing to gain by speaking. The cafés still glow the music, still plays the art, still dazzles. But you, having heard the voices, Bertrand gathers know the truth. The facade is cracking. The city can no longer pretend it does not see. The investigation has begun, and with it, the slow unraveling of everything Paris thought it could conceal. By the spring of 1907, the cafés no longer hum with the same unshakable confidence. You feel it in the way conversations break off when the door creaks open, in the nervous glances exchanged across candlelit tables. Inspector Bertrand's presence has shifted from rumor to inevitability. The city knows he is closing in, though no one can say how or when the trap will spring. Bertrand moves like a shadow through Paris. One evening, he is spotted at the docks in Le Havre, watching crates marked pigments unloaded under the moonlight. Another night, he is seen in Belleville, listening quietly to a laborer describe the strange powders delivered in sacks of flour. He does not announce himself, nor does he seek arrests for show. Instead, he builds his case with relentless patience, each detail added to his notebook until the pattern gleams unmistakable. You notice the effect on the network. Bobby Chen grows restless, his once confident experiments rushed and sloppy. The vials he produces no longer carry the same assurance of purity. Whispers spread of overdoses, of mixtures too harsh. Elise Dubois cornered by debts and fear carves frantically, her sculptures fractured beyond recognition. Patrons buy them anyway, but not for art, for evidence of her unraveling a piece of gossip to hang on their walls. Even Jean Baptiste, once untouchable, paints with the desperation of a man who knows his days are numbered. His canvases blaze brighter than ever, but the brilliance feels frantic, like sparks before darkness. Madame Noire adapts with characteristic grace, but you see the cracks in her composure. She speaks more softly, guards her words, keeps a closer watch on who enters her domain. Rumor has it, she has begun to destroy records, ledgers burned in fireplaces, letters torn to shreds. Yet she cannot erase the memory of witnesses, nor the observations of Bertrand, whose eyes seem to miss nothing. Margaret Worthington remains calm, almost too calm. She continues to host salons, continues to glide among aristocrats, with pearls gleaming. But you sense that her elegance masks calculation. Some whisper she is already arranging her escape, transferring money quietly, preparing safe houses beyond France. Others insist she is untouchable, too well connected to ever fall. You wonder which is worse, that she will escape justice, or that she will outlast the very system she built. For you, the tension is unbearable. Each night in the cafés feels like waiting in a theater where the curtain is about to fall, though no one knows when. Patrons laugh louder, drink harder, as if defying the silence pressing down on them. The music is wilder, the art more reckless, as though the city itself is burning its last reserves of brilliance before the lights go out. It is beauty, pushed to the edge of collapse, a frenzy born of fear. Even the pianists misnote, their fingers trembling, while singers belt with forced bravado that cracks at the edges. Bertrand himself becomes a phantom presence. You hear stories of him comparing the network to a chessboard, every café, a piece, every patron, a pawn, every financier, a knight protecting the queen at the center. And with each note in his book, he moves one piece closer to checkmate. You hear, too, of a painter you barely knew, Henri Leclerc, who vanishes overnight, his studio abandoned, canvases half finished. Some say he fled to Spain, terrified that Bertrand's net would catch him. Others whisper that he drowned in the Seine, unable to face what was coming. Either way, his absence is another hole in the once vibrant tapestry of Montparnasse. One evening, as you leave La Chambre Obscure, you catch sight of Bertrand, standing in the fog, notebook in hand. He writes a single line, snaps the book shut, and vanishes into the night. In that moment, you realize the truth. The cafés have not yet fallen, but they are already caught. The lasso has tightened. It is only a matter of time before the final pull. The unraveling of the network does not begin with a raid or a dramatic confession. It begins with a handful of photographs, images so stark, so undeniable, that no amount of glamour or denial can disguise them. You hear of them first in whispers, then see them for yourself. And once you do, you cannot unsee them. They come from Philippe de Rothschild, a young aristocrat with a passion for photography. Known in Parisian circles for his taste in fast cars and lavish soirees, he seems an unlikely figure to ignite scandal. But one evening, his camera follows his curiosity into places most men of his station never dare to tread. Guided by fascination or perhaps recklessness, he captures what others have only whispered about. The photographs are grainy, the lighting harsh, but the truths they reveal cut sharper than any critic's pen. One shows Jean Baptiste collapsed on the floor of Café de l'Amour paint, smeared across his clothes, a syringe glinting beside his hand, while admirers look on like parishioners at a fallen saint. Another captures Elise Dubois hunched over a block of marble, eyes wild, while a waiter slips a packet into her pocket. Others reveal bankers in suits leaning across cafe tables, their ledgers open beside small glass vials. Art, finance, and addiction frozen together in a single frame. When the photos surface, Paris gasps. At first, they circulate quietly, passed hand to hand, in smoky cafes, and whispered about in salons. But soon they find their way into the newspapers. La Gazette prints one on its front page with a headline that reads, "The poison behind the canvas." Suddenly, the myth cannot be maintained. No matter how much critics praise the art, no matter how elegantly Margaret Worthington spins her narrative, the public now sees the truth in black and white. The reaction is explosive. Politicians thunder in the assembly, demanding accountability. Parents clutch the papers in horror, recognizing the faces of sons and daughters among the background figures. Some artists attempt to defend themselves, claiming the images were taken out of context, that they show only moments of weakness. But the damage is done. The spell of glamour has shattered. Heroin is no longer a muse. It is a scandal. You watch as the cafes descend into panic. Patrons argue in hushed tones, debating whether to stay or flee. Madame Noir usually composed moves with clipped precision, her smile brittle. Rumor spreads that she is destroying evidence, burning letters, erasing names. Margaret Worthington remains serene in public, but you hear whispers that she has sent for lawyers and diplomats preparing to shield herself. The photographs have pierced even her armor, for no amount of pearls can erase an image once printed in ink. Inspector Bertrand wastes no time. He seizes on the photographs as the leverage he has been waiting for. Witnesses who once hesitated now step forward emboldened by proof. Concierges, musicians, even waiters testify their words, reinforced by the images. What once seemed rumor becomes fact. The net Bertrand has woven tightens swiftly, every line pulled taut by the weight of undeniable evidence. For you, seeing the photographs is like watching a dream dissolve into daylight. The cafes, once mysterious, seductive, alive with smoke and music, now appear sordid, desperate, pitiful. You wonder if they were always this way, and it was only the glamour that blinded you. Perhaps Paris has not changed. Perhaps only your eyes have opened. One evening, you walk past a newsstand and see Jean Baptiste's image staring back at you from a front page. His hollow eyes seem to meet yours, pleading, ashamed, broken. The headline screams of decadence and disgrace. Strangers pause, point, shake their heads, and in that moment, you know that the cafes are finished, not by fire or by bullets, but by photographs, silent witnesses that speak louder than any rumor. By the dawn of 1928, the tension that has gripped Paris for years finally breaks. The whispers, the photographs, The testimonies, all threads that Bertrand has gathered, now converge into a single, decisive act. The city wakes one morning to the sound of boots on cobblestones, whistles cutting through fog, and the crash of doors splintering under force. The raids have begun. You see it first in Montparnasse, where Café de l'Amour once thrived as the beating heart of the craze. At dawn, police wagons rumble down the narrow streets, their lanterns casting harsh light on shuttered windows. Officers swarm the entrance, shoving aside patrons who stumble into the street, half-dressed eyes wide with shock. Inside, syringes clatter to the floor. Paintings are torn from walls and packets of powder scatter like spilled sugar. Madame Noire is nowhere to be found. Some say she escaped through a hidden passage, others that she bribed her way out. Whatever the truth, her empire collapses in a single morning, its glamour stripped bare under the weight of law. In Belleville, La Sirène Noire meets a similar fate. You hear the shrieks of women dragged into the street, the curses of men pressed against walls. Bottles shatter, instruments are trampled, the music silenced under the stomp of boots. The neighbors watch from windows, crossing themselves, muttering that the fever has finally met in its cure. But you see no cure here, only chaos bodies, trembling, reputations, destroyed lives, upended in an instant. The raids spread across the city. In the Marais salons that once glittered with aristocrats are stripped of velvet and lace, leaving behind overturned chairs and broken chandeliers. In Montmartre, poets scatter like pigeons, fleeing into alleys, abandoning manuscripts and sketches in their haste. Police seize ledgers, photographs, and crates marked as art supplies. Bertrand's notes have come to life, his web of whisper transformed into warrants and arrests. And yet, as you watch, you cannot help but feel the brutality of it. The officers are not gentle. They shout, they strike, they drag men and women alike into wagons. You see Jean Baptiste among them, his face gaunt, his hands bound, his eyes glazed with both opium and despair. Elise Dubois screams as her sculpture is smashed in the struggle marble dust, clouding the air like ashes. Even Bobby Chen the chemist is hauled away clutching a vial to his chest as though it were a child. The fever is not ended. It is merely exposed its sufferers, treated as criminals rather than patients. The city reels. Newspapers trumpet victory, praising the police for cleansing Paris of its poison. Politicians boast of moral triumphs of art reclaimed from corruption. But in the cafés that remain standing, silence reigns. Patrons no longer laugh, no longer whisper. They stare into empty cups, haunted by the memory of music, of smoke, of fever that once bound them together. The spell is broken, and in its place lies only ruin. Inspector Bertrand stands at the center of it all, his expression unreadable. He does not celebrate, nor does he gloat. He only turns another page in his notebook, writes a final line, and closes it. For him, the raids are not victory, but conclusion, the inevitable end of a story written long ago. For Paris, they are both death and rebirth, the collapse of an empire built on powder and illusion. And for you standing in the cold morning air, as wagons rattle away the sound of chains and sobs echoing in their wake, the truth is undeniable. The heroin cafés are gone. Their art, their glamour, their frenzy, all reduced to dust beneath the boots of 1928. Paris will never forget them, but it will never see their like again. When the smoke clears from the raids of 1928, you expect silence. You expect Paris to heal, to retreat into sobriety, to bury its fever like a shameful secret, but instead you discover another layer beneath the surface more intricate and more dangerous than you imagined. For while the cafes crumble the power they generated, the money, the art, the influence does not vanish. It shifts, it moves into the hands of those who know how to weaponize it. You first glimpse this new reality in a glittering salon near the Champs-Élysées. Gone are the smoky artists' cafes. Here diplomats and aristocrats sip champagne beneath chandeliers. On the walls hang canvases painted in fevered nights, bought for exorbitant sums, and now displayed as trophies of sophistication. But as you listen to the conversations, you realize these paintings are more than decoration. They are bargaining chips. Ambassadors speak of them as if they were currency trading promises of exhibitions for favorable trade agreements, exchanging canvases as tokens of loyalty. Art, once corrupted by heroin, is reborn as a diplomatic weapon. Margaret Worthington, astonishingly unscathed by the raids, presides over this transformation. She speaks the language of politics as fluently as that of art, framing her collections as cultural treasures, essential for understanding the modern spirit. Foreign envoys court her favor, hoping that acquiring one of her works might curry influence with Parisian elites. You realize she has shifted seamlessly from dealer to diplomat, from patron of artists to broker of nations. Inspector Bertrand may have dismantled the cafes, but even he cannot dismantle the hunger of governments. German officials arrive seeking pieces by Jean Baptiste, whose tragic downfall has only heightened his fame. American investors discreetly purchase Elise Dubois's fractured sculptures, presenting them in New York as symbols of Parisian daring. Even the British, wary of scandal, quietly arrange for paintings to cross the channel, insisting they are for preservation, while secretly displaying them in private halls. One evening, you attend such a gathering in a grand embassy hall. The chandeliers blaze, the polished floors reflect the swirl of gowns and uniforms, and the air hums with languages from across Europe. At the center of the room hangs a painting you recognize instantly, Jean Baptiste's fevered vision of fire and ruin created in a night of intoxication. Yet here it is framed in gilt, admired by men in medals and women in diamonds. You overhear a diplomat murmur, "It speaks of resilience. France bleeds, yet creates beauty still." Another replies, "Then we must honor it with concessions with trust." You feel a chill as you realize the painting has ceased to be art. It has become leverage. For you, the irony is dizzying. The very works born in smoke-filled rooms, bartered for vials of powder, now hang in embassies, shaping perceptions of nations. A sculpture carved in delirium becomes the centerpiece of a diplomatic dinner. A sketch scrawled between injections is presented as evidence of France's vitality. Addiction has been recast as genius, and genius has been harnessed as soft power. Walking home past the glowing facades of government buildings, you realize Paris has not abandoned the heroin craze. It has simply evolved. It absorbed it into the bloodstream of politics. The fever has become policy. The cafes are gone, but their legacy endures not as scandal, but as influence. And you understand with a chill that art is no longer merely art. In the hands of diplomats, it is a weapon polished and framed, aimed not at the soul, but at the stage of nations. You begin to realize that the cafes were never just about art or even about heroin. They were listening posts crossroads where whispers traveled as easily as packets. Now, with the cafes dismantled, their echoes linger in new corridors, embassies, salons, and dim hotel rooms where curtains are always drawn. The fever of Paris has not only infected art, it has seeped into the bloodstream of espionage. It starts with rumors. A Russian attaché is said to have used Margaret Worthington's soirees as cover for passing coded notes hidden within the frames of paintings. A German diplomat allegedly purchased Elise Dubois's sculpture, not for its beauty, but for the documents concealed in its hollow base. You hear whispers that even British intelligence has trafficked in this trade, using Jean Baptiste's canvases as couriers, the brushstrokes hiding invisible inks. Suddenly, every masterpiece seems suspect, every sculpture a vault, every gallery a potential drop site. Inspector Bertrand senses it too, though his official investigation ends with the raids. He cannot ignore the darker current beneath. He attends a reception at the Hôtel de Crillon, where ambassadors toast to friendship beneath chandeliers. He watches the way envelopes slide into pockets, the way hands linger too long on polished frames. Later, you see him jot a single line in his notebook. Heroin was only the beginning. For you, the revelation is chilling. You recall nights in smoky cafes where artists argued politics, barely aware of the listeners at the next table. You remember strangers with accents slipping in and out unnoticed amid the haze. What you thought were coincidences now look like patterns. Paris was never just an addict. It was an informant bleeding secrets along with art. Margaret thrives in this new darkness. She cultivates diplomats as she once did poets, offering them canvases laced with secrets. To her, heroin was always a tool, never the goal. Now the tool has changed, but the game remains the same. She becomes not just a dealer of art, but a broker of intelligence, a queen moving pawns across Europe's board. The artists broken and scattered are pawns too. Jean Baptiste's surviving works are smuggled to Berlin, rumored to carry chemical formulas hidden in the pigments. Elise Dubois, locked in despair, sells fragments of her sculptures to a man who claims to be a collector, but speaks with the clipped precision of an agent. Even Bobby Chen, before his arrest, was said to have sold recipes not only for heroin, but for explosives, his laboratory serving both addict and spy. One evening, you find yourself in the back room of a gallery near Place Vendôme. At first glance, it looks ordinary paintings stacked against the wall crates half open. But then you watch a diplomat slip a thin envelope behind a canvas, his eyes darting to be sure no one sees. Minutes later, another man retrieves it, nodding almost imperceptibly before disappearing into the night. The artwork is no longer creation. It is camouflage. And you realize that what once bloomed from delirium has now become the perfect hiding place for power. You walk the boulevards and feel Paris changing around you. Once it was the city of light, then the city of fever. Now it is the city of shadows, where nothing is what it seems. Every gala could be a cover, every exhibition a code. Behind the glitter of chandeliers lies the grinding machinery of espionage, fueled by the same desperation that once fed the cafes. And you realize with a chill that the heroin craze was never only about pleasure or ruin. It was training, a rehearsal, The cafés were laboratories not only of art, but of manipulation. Now, their graduates move in silence through embassies and ministries, carrying the same skills, the same secrecy, the same hunger into the darker game of nations. You once thought the fever belonged only to artists, dreamers, and broken souls haunting the left bank. But as the years pass, you see that the contagion has seeped into the veins of Parisian nobility itself. The very people who once whispered disdain for bohemian excess now find themselves seduced not only by the drug, but by the shadows it conceals. In salons, lined with gilded mirrors, dukes and duchesses gather under the pretense of culture. They sip champagne, while musicians play softly in the background. Yet beneath the glittering surface transactions unfold. You watch as a marquis accepts a packet slipped discreetly into his pocket, his smile unbroken as he nods to his hostess. At another gathering, a countess leans close to an envoy, murmuring promises of introductions in exchange for favors measured not in gold, but in powder. The addiction is not always physical. For many nobles, heroin is a badge of daring proof that they too can flirt with ruin, like the artists they idolize. Some adopt the fashions of Montparnasse unkempt scarves, smudged eyeliner parading their rebellion, while their servants wait in the carriage outside. They mimic the hunger of the poor, without ever risking true destitution. To you it feels grotesque, like watching actors play at tragedy while the stage burns beneath them. But others fall deeper. You hear of a baron whose estates are mortgaged away to finance shipments. A viscountess disappears from public life, rumored to spend her days locked in a velvet-draped chamber, attended only by a nurse and a supplier. Even whispers reach you of a duke who trades political influence for access, reshaping alliances in exchange for deliveries from abroad. Nobility, once a shield, has become another mask for dependence. Margaret Worthington understands this better than anyone. She cultivates the aristocracy with the same finesse she once used on poets. To her soirees come counts and duchesses ostensibly to admire her collection. But you see the truth. They are there for what the canvases conceal. She plays them against each other, offering a sculpture here, a packet there each transaction, another thread in her growing web. Nobility, once the guardian of tradition, now bows before her subtle power. Inspector Bertrand, too, sees the rot. Though his official mandate never extended into politics, he cannot ignore the names that surface in his notes. Family crests scrawled beside transactions, coats of arms lurking in the margins of testimonies. He knows the fever has reached the highest echelons, but he also knows the cost of exposing it. Nobility can crush as easily as it can patronize. Perhaps that is why his notebook closes unfinished, why some names remain unspoken. For you, the sight of aristocrats entwined in the same fever that consumed the cafés is unsettling beyond measure. Paris once believed its nobility immune, distant, eternal. Now you see them revealed as human, fragile, greedy, desperate. They too crave escape. They too barter dignity for oblivion. The difference is only that their collapse is gilded, hidden behind palace doors, softened by wealth that ensures their ruin. Looks almost beautiful. Walking past the Hotel de Ville, one evening, you glimpse a carriage drawing away curtains, half closed. Inside, a countess reclines, with glassy eyes, her jeweled hand clutching a vial. The sight strikes you like a revelation. Paris is no longer divided, by class in this fever, from garret to palace, from artist to aristocrat, all are bound by the same thread. The cafés may have fallen, but the sickness has ascended to the gilded halls of power, and in that ascent it becomes even more dangerous, for when the guardians of a nation falter, the entire nation trembles with them. You had once believed that the world of scholarship and faith would stand apart from the fever. Surely, professors, priests, and abbots would keep their distance, defending reason and morality against the creeping fog. But as you wander through Paris after the raids, you discover that even these pillars of society are not immune. The hunger for knowledge, the thirst for revelation, these too have become tangled in the same web that once held the artists. At the Sorbonne, students whisper about a professor of philosophy who lectures with wild eyes and trembling hands. His words are luminous, fiery, but fragmented, darting from Descartes to Nietzsche, to visions of a new humanity. You sit in his hall one afternoon, the air thick with incense from a censer. He burns to clarify the mind. Only later do you learn that he has been supplied by the same network that once filled Montparnasse with smoke. The students adore him, copying his words as if they were scripture blind to the fever that fuels them. Among historians, too, the fever has taken hold. One scholar claims heroin opens doorways into the past, letting him walk with Charlemagne in his dreams. His papers, written in manic bursts, dazzle and disturb, half brilliance, half delirium. Journals rush to publish his work, ignoring the stains of powder on the margins. You wonder how many truths are hidden, how many lies are born when scholarship is written with a trembling hand. But it is in the churches where the sight unsettles you most. You wander into a chapel in the Marais one night, hoping for silence. Instead, you find a young priest kneeling before the altar, a vial glinting in the candlelight beside him. His lips move in prayer, but his body sways with intoxication. He preaches that the drug is not a sin, but a sacrament, a ladder to the divine. A small flock gathers around him, their faces rapt, convinced they are glimpsing heaven through the haze. The incense rises, but it is laced with something stronger, and you leave with a chill in your bones. Not all clergy succumb. Some fight back, condemning the fever as the work of temptation, the snare of the devil. They thunder from pulpits, warning that Paris risks becoming a modern Babylon. Yet even they cannot escape suspicion. Rumors swirl of abbots who accept donations from Margaret Worthington's salons, of bishops who quietly protect noble patrons implicated in the scandal. The church itself seems divided, its voice fractured, its authority eroded by the same shadows that cloud the city. Inspector Bertrand listens, but does not interfere. He knows his jurisdiction ends at the cloisters and lecture halls. Still, his notes grow heavier, filled with names of scholars, priests, and bishops. He writes not as an investigator now, but as a witness chronicling how the fever reaches even those sworn to truth and holiness. For you, the realization is devastating. Paris, once the beacon of reason and faith, now staggers like a city possessed. Knowledge and prayer, instead of anchors, have become sails caught in the same storm. The cafés are gone, but their legacy endures in classrooms and sanctuaries, twisting the very foundations of society. And you cannot help but wonder, if even scholars and priests fall, who is left to guard the truth? By now, you understand that Paris has become a theater, its stages not confined to cafés or galleries, but spread across ministries, embassies, even pulpits. What was once a fever of art and intoxication has been transformed into something colder, sharper a weapon. Culture itself, soaked in the residue of heroin, is being sharpened into a blade to be wielded in the struggles of nations. It begins with exhibitions. You attend one at the Grand Palais banners, fluttering proudly above its glass dome. Officially, it is a celebration of modern French genius. In truth, it is a parade of canvases and sculptures born in nights of ruin, rebranded as symbols of national vitality. Crowds flock to admire Jean Baptiste's fiery visions, Elise Dubois' fractured statues, even Bobby Chen's strange geometric sketches smuggled from his laboratory. The public applauds, unaware or unwilling to see that the works are trophies of a plague. Ministers smile for photographers, proclaiming that France leads the world in creativity, while behind closed doors, they discuss tariffs, treaties, and alliances. Margaret Worthington orchestrates much of it. She has shifted from patroness to strategist, arranging which works are displayed abroad, which are withheld, which are gifted to curry favor. To her, art is no longer expression, but artillery. A painting sent to Berlin buys goodwill. A sculpture withheld from London signals displeasure. She builds her arsenal carefully, each piece calibrated to strike not at enemies' bodies, but at their perceptions. Other nations catch on. Germany mounts its own exhibitions, featuring Parisian works purchased at ruinous prices, flaunting them as proof of cultural dominance. Britain counters by opening private galleries, stocked with rescued pieces, claiming the role of guardian rather than participant. America, bold and brash, buys everything it can, filling new museums with relics of Montparnasse and presenting them as evidence of its own rising modernity. The fever, once hidden in smoky rooms, now marches openly across borders under the guise of art. For you, the effect is disorienting. You wander through the exhibition halls and feel both awe and disgust. The works still blaze with power, but their meanings are twisted, their origins erased. What was once confession is now propaganda. What was once despair is now diplomacy. You hear a minister declare, "This art proves that France has conquered its demons," and you want to shout the truth. The demons have not been conquered, only disguised. Even the church joins in. Cathedrals host concerts of heroin-era compositions, billing them as hymns of suffering turned to beauty. Scholars publish essays reframing the fever as a crucible of genius, glossing over the bodies left behind. The narrative is rewritten, the sickness recast as sacrifice, the chaos reframed as destiny. Paris, always adept at reinvention, has found a way to make even its shame into power. You leave one such exhibition late at night, the banners still rippling above the crowds, still buzzing with patriotic pride. Yet inside you, there is only unease. You have seen the nights when these works were created, the trembling hands, the glazed eyes, the whispered bargains. You know the truth behind the gilt frames and polished speeches, and you realize that Paris has not ended the fever at all. It has institutionalized it, wielded it, turned it outward as a weapon cloaked in beauty. The heroin craze has become history, but history itself has been drafted into war. You imagine that once the cafés are gone, Paris will return to calm like a fever broken, But instead, what you see is confusion and emptiness. Where once there was a constant pulse, the city feels quieter, yet not healthier. Streets once alive with reckless music now echo with silence. Canvases dry on easels abandoned. The collapse of the cafés has not cured Paris. It has left a void, and in that void blooms a different kind of sickness. At first, there is relief. Newspapers praise the police, claiming that vice has been banished. Parents clutch their children tighter, hopeful that temptation has been buried with the rubble of Montparnasse. Yet, beneath the public triumph lies private despair. Artists who once relied on the frenzy for both income and inspiration now find themselves stranded. Without the constant hum of cafes, their work slows, their confidence falters. Some leave Paris, entirely scattering to Berlin, London, New York, searching for new audiences. Others simply fade, their names forgotten before the paint on their last canvases dries. The galleries feel the blow as well. Collectors hesitate, unsure if buying the works of Jean Baptiste or Elise Dubois might brand them as sympathizers of a discredited era. Prices plummet. Masterpieces that once drew gasps now gather dust in storage rooms. Even the aristocrats, once so eager to parade their daring retreat into silence, claiming amnesia about the soirees where they once bartered packets for paintings. You walk into one gallery on Rue de Rivoli and find the lights dim, the air stale, the walls half empty. A janitor sweeps dust where once crowds had pressed shoulder to shoulder, and the silence weighs heavier than any scandal. You notice the city's mood shift. Where once there was reckless laughter, now there is suspicion. Patrons eye one another warily, wondering who might still be secretly involved, who might still crave the fever. Police linger on corners, their presence more oppressive than reassuring. The cafes, though physically gone, leave behind ghosts' memories that stalk the boulevards, reminders that Paris cannot so easily cleanse itself. Even the ordinary rhythms of life seem disrupted. At street markets, vendors mutter that artists no longer come to buy pigments or brushes. In theaters, actors speak of dwindling crowds, the patrons restless without the thrill of scandal. Families gather at dinner tables and find silence settling between them, as if the absence of fever has stolen not only chaos, but conversation. It is as though the city, in cutting out its sickness, has also severed an artery of vitality. Inspector Bertrand, for all his persistence, does not celebrate. You glimpse him once on the Pont Neuf, staring into the river, his notebook closed. Perhaps he knows the truth, that removing the cafes has not ended the sickness, only driven it underground. He walks away without speaking, his silhouette swallowed by the mist. For you, the city feels like a theater after the curtain has fallen. The stage is bare, the actors gone, but the air still hums with the echo of their voices. Paris has lost something, not only its scandal, but its strange vitality. The fever had burned too bright, but in burning, it gave the city a dangerous kind of brilliance. Now, without it, Paris seems diminished, uncertain of what to become, and so begins the cultural crisis. Not the fever itself, but the absence it leaves behind. You tell yourself that with the cafes gone, at least the survivors will find peace. But soon you see that peace is not what awaits them. The cafes may have collapsed in smoke and scandal, yet the habits they left behind cling like chains. Those who once lived for the fever now drift through Paris, carrying its ghost inside them. They are not criminals, Not rebels, not artists, only patients without medicine, wanderers without direction. In the narrow alleys of Montparnasse, you pass Jean Baptiste, his once bright eyes dulled, his hands trembling too much to hold a brush. He mutters about visions, about canvases that burn in his mind, but never reach the canvas. Crowds no longer gather around him. They avoid him, embarrassed by his decline. His genius remains, but it is trapped behind walls of dependency unreachable, without the poison that nearly destroyed him. You realize with a shock that survival does not mean salvation. Others fare no better. Elise Dubois, once celebrated for her daring sculptures, now carves small fragments, half-finished busts, broken limbs, selling them quietly in street markets. The art is not what it was. It is pale, desperate, haunted. She insists she no longer uses, but you see the signs, the hollow cheeks, the restless eyes, the frantic hands. For her, as for so many others, the café was not only a place, but a condition of existence. Without it, she wanders in search of a muse she cannot find. Doctors begin to speak of a new illness, something they call manufactured dependency syndrome. They say it is more than addiction. It is a kind of programming, an imprint left on the soul. Once a person has tied inspiration to intoxication, breaking, that bond is like tearing flesh from bone. You see this truth written on every survivor's face. They are not free, they are fractured. Even those who never touched the drug feel its weight. Musicians who played in the cafés complain that their music now feels empty, stripped of the chaos that once electrified it. Writers stare at blank pages, unable to summon words without the atmosphere of smoke and frenzy. Patrons wander aimlessly through new cafés, searching for the spark, but finding only bland conversation and bitter coffee. The fever has left a scar deeper than any raid could heal. Families, too, bear the wounds. Mothers sit at kitchen tables waiting for sons who will never return. Wives pace apartment floors, their husbands gaunt and absent even when present. Children learn to whisper around the subject, as though silence might erase the shame. Paris is full of survivors, yet it feels like a city in mourning. Inspector Bertrand, though outwardly victorious, seems haunted as well. You hear that he visits hospitals late at night, speaking quietly with patients, writing their words into his notebook. Perhaps he knows his raids did not cure them. Perhaps he understands that the cafés were only the visible symptom of a sickness that now lingers unseen. For you, walking these streets is like moving through a graveyard of the living. Survivors drift like ghosts, half here, half elsewhere. Their bodies present, but their spirits tethered to the past. And you realize with dread that Paris has not been healed at all. It has only entered a new stage of its illness, one defined not by feverish brilliance, but by dependency that outlives its source. You find yourself drawn into conversations that never seem to end, arguments that spill from cafés into lecture halls, from lecture halls into newspapers, from newspapers into whispered debates at dinner tables. The question is simple, yet impossible. Should the art born of fever, hallucination, and ruin be celebrated or condemned? Some insist the works must be preserved, even revered. They argue that genius is genius, no matter its source. Was not Van Gogh tormented? One critic asks. Did not Baudelaire write of opium? If heroin drove Jean Baptiste to paint flames that still burn in our eyes, do we dare turn away from them? They claim that suffering is the midwife of beauty, and that to deny the fever's art is to deny the truth of human experience. Others recoil. To them, the paintings are tainted, unholy relics of corruption. Would you hang poison on your wall? A politician demands in the assembly. Would you praise madness as though it were wisdom? They argue that every canvas carries not only brush strokes, but also the stench of needles, the cries of the lost. To display them is to glamorize destruction, to invite a new generation, to romanticize their own collapse. You listen to both sides and feel torn. You have seen the works created in smoke and trembling, seen the eyes of the artists as they bartered their souls. You cannot deny their power standing before Elise Dubois's fractured statues. You feel awe even now, but neither can you deny the wreckage behind them. The wasted bodies, the families shattered, the lives abandoned for brilliance that lasted only a moment. The debate spreads beyond Paris. In Berlin, critics hail the fever's art as the true voice of modernity. In London, newspapers sneer at it as continental decadence. In New York, collectors quietly pay fortunes for smuggled canvases, insisting that history will judge them kindly. Across Europe and America, the question becomes a mirror. Each nation reveals more about itself in its answer than about the art itself. Scholars join the fray, writing volumes that try to untangle the knot. Some argue that heroin was merely a catalyst, that the artists carried brilliance already within them, waiting for release. Others claim the drug was inseparable, that without it, the works would never have existed. The journals fill with diagrams, comparisons, furious rebuttals. Yet no one can offer proof, only conviction. For the public, the debate is not academic. It shapes what hangs in museums, what children are taught, what legacies endure. You walk through the halls of the Louvre one afternoon and find a crowd arguing in front of a single canvas, Jean Baptiste's Ashes of Verdun. A young student whispers that it proves genius. An old soldier snarls that it desecrates sacrifice. The painting does not move, but it seems alive, absorbing their fury. Inspector Bertrand never speaks on the matter, at least not publicly, but you imagine him sitting with his closed notebook, staring at a painting with the same calm, relentless eyes he once turned on suspects. Perhaps he wonders, as you do, whether truth can survive contamination, whether beauty forged in ruin can ever be separated from the ruin itself. For you, the question lingers like smoke. You want to believe that art transcends its origins, that beauty can rise even from ashes. Yet each time you look into the hollow eyes of a survivor, you feel doubt gnaw at you. Perhaps the fever's art is both brilliance and curse, beauty and warning. Perhaps its value lies not in choosing one side, but in acknowledging both. And so the debate continues, without resolution. Paris remains divided, its museums and its conscience split. The fever has passed, but the question it leaves behind endures, echoing in every gallery, every classroom, every whispered conversation about what art truly means. The more you reflect, the clearer it becomes that the cafés were not just dens of intoxication. They were laboratories, places where minds and emotions were tested, stretched and broken in the name of something greater than pleasure. The survivors call them temples of ruin, but you begin to see them as workshops of manipulation. What happened in Montparnasse was not accidental. It was engineered. In the cramped back rooms, Bobby Chen once distilled powders with the precision of a scientist. Jean Baptiste painted under the watchful gaze of patrons who fed him just enough poison to keep the visions flowing. Elise Dubois chiseled furiously while suppliers timed her deliveries, ensuring that desperation kept her hands moving. None of this was random. Each cafe seemed to function as an experiment, its artists treated like subjects, its patrons like observers taking notes. You recall overhearing conversations that now strike you as sinister. A banker boasting that he could predict an artist's mood swings by adjusting the dose. A patron laughing that a poem written in withdrawal was worth twice as much as one written in calm. These were not coincidences, they were manipulations. The cafes were laboratories of control, turning art into data, suffering into profit. Inspector Bertrand's files hint at the same conclusion. Though never published, his notes describe patterns too precise to ignore cycles of supply and creation, bursts of brilliance followed by collapsed patrons, circling like vultures. He writes of designed dependency, a phrase that chills you even now. The fever was not just a sickness. It was cultivated, a crop tended for harvest. Margaret Worthington understood this perfectly. She was less a patron and more a conductor, orchestrating doses, arranging debuts, calculating the moment when despair would produce its most marketable masterpiece. To her, the cafes were not chaotic, but methodical, each one a chamber where humanity could be bent and reshaped. She sold not only art, but the illusion that suffering was genius packaging tragedy for the market like a commodity. For you, the realization is devastating. You remember nights when you thought you were witnessing freedom artists unbound, chasing visions beyond reason. Now you see the strings. They were not free, but manipulated, their pain prolonged because it was profitable, their collapse delayed until it could be monetized. You were not a witness to brilliance, but a participant in an experiment designed to prove how much beauty could be wrung from despair. The legacy of this manipulation lingers. Survivors speak of voices in their heads, not hallucinations, but echoes of instructions. Patrons telling them to push harder. Dealers reminding them that suffering sells. Even in sobriety, they feel like test subjects who never left the lab, and perhaps they never will. As you walk past the shuttered ruins of La Sirène Noire, you imagine it not as a cafe, but as a laboratory abandoned mid-experiment. The tables are gone, the music silent, but the ghosts of manipulation remain. Every wall seems to hum with memory of needles, measured of arguments, staged of despair, harnessed like electricity, and you realize with a shiver that the heroin craze was not just a cultural fever, it was a calculated manipulation of human desire, a test to see how far minds and souls could be bent before they broke. The cafes were not refuges or prisons. They were laboratories, and Paris was the experiment. You walk through Paris one last time, and the city feels different now. The cafes are shuttered, the music silenced, but the echoes remain. You can almost hear the laughter rising from cellars, the clink of glasses, the scratch of pens on paper, the hush of secrets passed between trembling hands. Yet all of it is memory, and memory carries with it not only nostalgia, but warning. The heroin craze of the 920s is gone, but you begin to see how its patterns repeat. The manipulation, the dependence, the weaponization of culture. These are not relics of one decade, but templates for the future. Already new distractions rise, jazz clubs glowing in the dark cinemas, projecting flickering dreams, factories promising speed and convenience at any cost. You feel the city racing ahead, eager to forget its fever by plunging into new intoxications. But you know better. You know that the fever will return only dressed in new clothes. Scholars argue that the cafés of Montparnasse were the first true laboratories of cultural manipulation. Politicians insist they were merely a shameful detour, but to you, they are neither. They are a mirror showing how fragile people are when desire, ambition, and pain are pressed together. They reveal that art can be corrupted, that pleasure can be engineered, and that entire cities can be bent toward ruin without ever realizing it until the end. Inspector Bertrand once said, "Heroin was only the beginning." His words haunt you now. You think of the survivors, their hollow eyes still searching for the muse they lost. You think of the nobles, the scholars, the priests all caught in the same net. And you realize that Paris itself was the patient, the laboratory, the battlefield. The fever may have passed, but the scars will shape generations. As you watch the sun set over the Seine, you wonder what warnings the future will heed or ignore. Will nations recognize when art becomes a tool of politics, when pleasure becomes a cage, when brilliance is wrung from suffering, like blood from a stone? Or will they, like Paris, mistake the fever for vitality until the collapse comes again? For you, the lesson is clear, though painful. The cafés of heroin were not only about ruin, they were about revelation. They proved how easily beauty can be twisted, how quickly freedom becomes manipulation, how art, faith, and knowledge can be bent into weapons. And in their collapse lies the reminder that no society, however brilliant, is immune to its own hunger. So the cafés become not just a memory, but a warning, a reminder whispered through time that every generation must guard its desires, must question its pleasures, must see through the glitter before it blinds. The fever is gone, but the danger remains, and Paris, wounded yet unbroken, stands as both monument and caution proof that brilliance and ruin are never far apart, and that the line between them is thinner than anyone dares admit. And so, friend, the story of Paris in the 1920s drifts to its close. You have walked the cobbled streets and smoky cellars, watched the cafés rise in brilliance and collapse in ruin. You have seen how heroin wrapped itself around art, around power, around faith itself, how it transformed from muse to weapon, from indulgence to instrument. In the end, it was never just about intoxication. It was about desire. Desire for escape, for beauty, for influence, for control. Paris became both laboratory and patient, a city that experimented on itself until it staggered. The cafés are gone now, but their ghosts linger in galleries, in embassies, in whispered debates that refuse to fade. They remain a mirror showing how fragile human hunger can be, how thin the line between brilliance and destruction truly is. And yet, out of ruin, there is something to carry with you. A warning, yes, but also a strange kind of wisdom, that art must be cherished, but never at the cost of the soul. That pleasure must be questioned, lest it become a chain. That power, cloaked in beauty, can seduce even the strongest into silence. These lessons are not Paris's alone. They belong to every generation that dares to dream, to create, to crave. So, as the Seine flows quietly under the bridges and the lights of Paris shimmer into the night, Let the echoes of this fever settle into memory. Close your eyes and rest, knowing that you have glimpsed both the brilliance and the shadow of a city that once burned too brightly. May its story guard your dreams, and may those dreams be gentle, steady, and free. Sleep well, and good night.